Chapter 1181, Harry Held Hostage. As Harry sprinted forward, closely following Hermione, his vision was not filled with the chaos of two clashing groups. Instead, he was haunted by the large, hooked nose of Argus Filch, the caretaker of Hogwarts. Memories from his second year flooded back. Before nearly headless Nick had invited him to the 500th Death Day party, Harry had been dragged to Filch's office for muddying the floors. It was there he discovered that Filch, a well-known squib, was attempting to learn magic through a crash course designed specifically for squibs. When Harry later recounted this to Ron and Hermione, Ron had laughed it off. Now, amidst the turmoil, Harry understood why Filch, despite his age and lack of job insecurity, was so desperate to master magic. In the wizarding world, squibs were regarded even lower than muggleborns, often derogatorily referred to as mudbloods by pure-blood families. The Ministry of Magic had deployed strikers to Diagon Alley, all of whom were wizards who had survived the recent brutal war. Under different circumstances, Harry would have hailed these individuals as heroes. Yet these same strikers, who had bravely faced Death Eaters and dark wizards loyal to Voldemort, were now attacking a group of defenseless people. Although provoked, their actions were unjustifiable. "No, don't harm them," Hermione screamed, rushing forward, but the enraged strikers paid her no heed. "This is dangerous, kid. This is not the place for you," one striker barked, pushing Hermione aside. He then brandished his wand, sending a red beam of light that struck down a protester. It was evident that these workers had been harboring resentment for some time. The strikers' aggressive actions initially caused panic among the crowd. However, a tall, burly man raised his hand and shouted, "The Ministry of Magic wants to silence us to hide its tyranny, but we will never yield. We will fight for our families and our lives." His words ignited the civilians' fury, and they surged forward, undeterred by the curses hurled at them. Though they were unable to perform magic, the sight of hundreds of strong, angry young men charging with makeshift weapons was undeniably intimidating. The onlooking wizards were alarmed and quickly retreated. "This damn mob thinks they can intimidate us," the striker who had pushed Hermione growled, casting a stunning spell at the shouting villager. Yet, the man was surprisingly nimble, ducking just in time to avoid the spell. The Ministry's strikers had no intention of killing. They merely sought to control the situation. However, faced with civilians outnumbering them 20 or 30 to 1, their wands were ineffective. If sheer numbers could overpower wizards, the wizarding world would not exist. The strikers, seasoned by war and working in unison, apparated to a safer distance, forming a large circle to contain the unarmed crowd. "Don't harm them. They're not." "What are you doing, Ron?" Hermione pleaded, seeing many villagers already fallen. She shouted at the strikers, but Ron suddenly pulled her, causing her to stumble. "What are you doing?" she demanded. Ron, however, was not focused on Hermione. His attention was fixed on a dark-skinned young man with thick fingers. Unlike his panicked companions, who were unsure of their next move after being surrounded, this young man charged forward with clear intent. "Can't you see she's speaking for you?" Harry interjected, stepping protectively in front of Hermione, his voice carrying a warning. "Atticus Blaine, how are you spending your summer vacation?" Amidst the chaos of cries, shouts, and angry yells, a striking young man called out their names with precision, greeting them warmly. Harry thought he might be imagining things, but the man's familiar gaze gave him a sense of déjà vu. "John, we don't involve children. That's the agreement." A stout woman, hurling bottles of corrosive liquid at the attackers, hurriedly shouted as she passed behind the man named John. "I know, I'm telling them to leave." The young man, repay. From this brief exchange, Harry learned that the young man's name was John. "Do you know us?" Hermione asked in astonishment, raising her wand to deflect a spell aimed at John. "What a pity you didn't recognize me," the man said, his expression dazed despite the perilous situation. He shook his head slightly, dodging a spell with ease, and then looked at Hermione calmly. Harry's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "Oh, you are!" Hermione exclaimed, a realization dawning on her. She covered her mouth, her voice dropping to a whisper, disbelief etched on her face. "Luna?" "It's me," John nodded nonchalantly, seemingly unaware of the shock and confusion he had caused. "Luna, but what's happened to you?" Ron stammered, his eyes wide with astonishment. Polyjuice potion, Hermione deduced quickly. But why are you pretending to be someone else? Luna was about to explain when she suddenly glanced at the row of fireplaces embedded in the wall. With a whoosh, the fireplaces erupted into green flames, and strikers began appearing on the platform one after another. Their stern expressions made it clear they weren't there for a friendly chat. The crowd, already taught a lesson and fleeing in fear, became even more frantic. The newly arrived attackers quickly joined the suppression team. Harry noticed camera flashes in the distance, indicating that the Daily Prophet reporters were eagerly capturing the unfolding drama. Seeing people fall one after another made Harry's veins bulge with frustration. He knew he had to act, or today's events would likely become a scandal that would rock the wizarding world. We have to handle this differently, Harry. Hermione's mind cleared, and she stopped Harry from charging into battle. We can't stop this. These attackers won't listen to us. You mean we should go to the Ministry of Magic for help? Harry asked urgently. But many people will get hurt if we delay. Hermione took a deep breath, her eyes burning with determination. I'm sorry, Harry, but I have an idea. It might require some sacrifice on your part. Harry blinked, confused. At this critical moment, Hermione disregarded the Ministry of Magic's laws. She flicked her wand, transforming the spatula in Luna's hand into a dagger, then pushed Harry into Luna's arms. Before Harry could react, Luna understood Hermione's plan. She swiftly placed the dagger against Harry's neck, the cold touch making him shiver. Are you going to? Harry began. I don't think you'll mind, Harry, Hermione said urgently. Oh, sure, just okay, Harry replied, taking a few deep breaths. Do what you need to do. This is really crazy. I don't think Sirius will be very pleased when he finds out, Ron muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. Hermione, however, had no time to worry about anything else. Seeing that Luna and Harry were already in position, she pulled Ron and Lavender back a few steps. With a determined look, she pointed her wand at her throat, took a deep breath, and in the next moment, a piercing scream echoed through the air. Stop! Someone is holding Harry Potter hostage. End of this chapter. Chapter 1182. Escalating Tensions. Hermione pulled Ron and the frightened Lavender back a few steps, then pointed her wand at her throat and took a deep breath. Stop it! Someone is holding Harry Potter hostage, she shouted. Her piercing scream silenced the chaos, causing everyone present to wince. Both the parade participants and the Ministry of Magic's suppressive strikers froze, staring at John and Harry in disbelief. Say something, Harry. John whispered urgently in Harry's ear. This must be the most humiliating moment of his life, Harry thought. But to defuse the situation, he had no choice but to comply, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Ahem, ahem. I'm Harry Potter. Help! He called out. Ron stifled a laugh, trying to appear nervous and concerned under Hermione's stern gaze. The strikers exchanged bewildered glances, unsure of how to proceed. It is indeed Harry Potter. I saw his scar. One of them confirmed. It's absolutely true. He and his friends were at the Ministry for a trial last month. I recognize them, murmured another. The strikers began to gather, whispering among themselves. Well done, John, someone from the parade team exclaimed, patting John on the shoulder. They looked at him with admiration for his quick thinking, believing that without this tactic, they would have been forced to surrender. Yet, some villagers watched uneasily as Harry was held hostage, recognizing the act as despicable. Still, to save their lives and gain leverage, they chose silence. Release the boy, or you'll find yourself in Avalon prison with 8-eyed spiders, a striker threatened John, glaring at him with disdain. You should be ashamed, another spat, disgusted. That kid defeated you-know-who for us. You're jeopardizing our future. Luna surveyed the crowd, waiting for the war-affected people to voice their demands. However, with Harry as a hostage, they seemed to look to her for leadership. We want to see Minister Bones. We want to see Mr. Blaine, Luna declared, speaking on their behalf. The marchers, bruised and battered, raised their hands in support of her. We should think about what to say when the Minister of Magic and Professor Blaine arrive, Ron said, his face expressionless as he observed the angry crowd. Don't expect to intimidate Professor Blaine, Hermione added, her eyes darting nervously between the strikers and Harry. He won't blame us. Even the capture of a young wizard like Harry Potter was enough to make the strikers hesitate. After a brief discussion, a man with a grim expression rushed into the fireplace, signaling the beginning of a tense wait. The two opposing groups on the platform suppressed their emotions, the air heavy with tension. About 5 minutes later, another group emerged from the fireplace. Leading them was a dark-skinned wizard leaning on a cane, his face solemn as he approached. The group following him moved with calm confidence, clearly more elite than the strikers who had arrived earlier. "Kingsley, you're out of the hospital!" Hermione exclaimed in surprise. Ron and Harry, still held by Luna, looked equally shocked. This was their first sighting of Kingsley since the war. Having only glimpsed him at St. Mungo's, Hermione quickly ran to meet him. She glanced at his wooden leg and felt a pang of sadness. "How are you feeling now, Kingsley?" she asked. Kingsley offered a faint smile, but his expression quickly turned serious as he squinted at her. "Harry was taken hostage. I'm genuinely surprised. You were trained by Atticus Blaine, weren't you?" An uneasy look flickered across Hermione's face. "We didn't anticipate that," she began, but her attention was drawn to the fireplace, which had dimmed once more. Her brow furrowed in concern. "What's happening, Kingsley? Does Minister Bones not wish to communicate with the people?" "Of course not," Kingsley replied, making a gesture. The elite aurors behind him sprang into action, driving away the reporters who had gathered to take pictures, dispersing the attackers who had assembled, and surrounding the para-D to keep the onlookers at a distance. "We must ensure Minister Bones' safety," Kingsley stated firmly. He then stepped forward, fixing John with a cold stare and raising his voice. "I am Kingsley Shacklebolt, head of the Auror office at the Ministry of Magic. Minister Bones will arrive shortly, but you must ensure Harry Potter remains unharmed. Otherwise, the Ministry will no longer offer you the chance for an equal dialogue." "We never intended to harm the child," Luna interjected, maintaining her composure. "We simply want to protect our rights." "Very well," Kingsley nodded gravely. "Minister Bones will address your reasonable demands. I urge you to remain calm during the negotiation process to prevent the Aurors from misjudging the situation and causing unforeseen consequences." Luna turned to see her companions nodding behind her, most of them displaying fear. "Then please have Minister Bones or Mr. Blaine come forward. We need to speak with the adults who can resolve our issues," Luna shouted. "She should be in Gryffindor, shouldn't she?" Lavender murmured, overhearing the conversation between Harry and the others, her eyes filled with admiration for Luna. Kingsley surveyed the landing platform. His aurors and enforcers were stationed everywhere, with some even on broomsticks, keeping watch from above. Satisfied that the situation was under control, Kingsley whispered to the auror beside him, who then rushed into the fireplace. Hermione watched the auror vanish into the flames, her anxiety mounting. This crisis was beyond her control. Before Minister Bones could arrive, Sirius appeared, his face as dark as a storm cloud. Hermione could tell he was eager to rush over and deal with Harry, but his duty kept him rooted in place. He stood vigilantly in front of the fireplace, scanning the area. Finally, Minister Bones emerged. To be honest, her appearance was disheveled, as if she had just been roused from sleep. Though her wizard hat concealed her messy hair, her bloodshot eyes, heavy eyeshadow, and slightly pale complexion betrayed her exhaustion. Sirius positioned himself protectively in front of Minister Bones, ready to shield her from any curse. Aurors clustered around her, prepared for any threat that might arise. However, Minister Bones didn't keep many people close. She allowed only Kingsley and Sirius to stand by her side. "I'm here, everyone," Amelia announced, her gaze shifting between John and Harry before settling. She took a deep breath, surveying the parade, and spoke softly. "I came not only to rescue this innocent child, but also to hear your grievances. I must admit, I am not entirely unaware of your plight. In fact, the Ministry of Magic has been negotiating with various parties, hoping to reach a consensus, but—" "That's a lie!" someone suddenly shouted from the parade, their voice filled with anguish. Everyone, including Luna and Harry, turned to look at the speaker. "It's Brother Ciel," Luna whispered, having already discerned John's identity. A look of pity flashed in her eyes as she observed the scene. "The one speaking is the younger brother, and the one in his arms is the older brother," Luna quietly explained to Harry, while everyone else's attention was focused elsewhere. You Ministry of Magic folks don't care about the lives of people like us. The large man, with a rough and weary appearance, sobbed and shouted at Minister Bones while half kneeling on the ground. Look around you. See all the injured people? They're all victims of the Ministry's actions. You don't even want to listen to us. Harry noticed the man glaring at him with resentment. If we hadn't kidnapped the famous Harry Potter, we wouldn't have seen you at all, right, Minister Bones? Chapter 1183. It's over. What nonsense! Sirius exclaimed, his face flushed with anger and his eyes twitching with frustration. You have no idea that the Ministry has been negotiating with the family behind the workshop you work for. And how did you repay us? By kidnapping an innocent child and using him as a bargaining chip. Sirius, Minister Bones interjected sharply, urging him to calm down. She turned her attention to the man kneeling on the ground, her expression sincere. Sir, it is true. The Ministry has been striving to restore order to the British wizarding world. However, I hope you understand the complexities involved. I fully empathize with your frustration and anger. I must admit, the department did not foresee this conflict, and thus, the strikers were not given detailed instructions on handling such a situation. I take full responsibility for this oversight. Amelia paused, taking a couple of deep breaths before continuing, her gaze fixed on the man. Sir, may I ask, who is the person in your arms? Is he your friend or your brother? Andrew is my brother, the man shouted, his voice filled with anger. He, like the others lying on the ground, was injured by the strikers. Very well, sir, Amelia replied, raising her voice to be heard over the murmurs of the crowd. Let's first ensure that those injured in this unfortunate misunderstanding are taken to St. Mungo's for treatment. We can discuss everything else afterward. I assure you, I will remain here until you are satisfied. The protesters seemed uncertain, glancing between John, who held Harry Potter hostage, and Holt, waiting for their decision. Harry nudged Luna, hoping for her assistance. Yet, strangely, Luna remained silent, her gaze distant. I think this is a good idea, Mr. Lou? Harry whispered, trying to prompt her. Luna continued to stare at John and Holt, her eyes unfocused. As the Minister of Magic, I promise that no one will be arrested today, Amelia added, sensing their apprehension. But these injured individuals need immediate medical attention to prevent further tragedy. Remember your promise, Minister Bones, Holt finally agreed, but before Amelia could relax, a villager shouted, Only one person can carry the wounded, and no wands allowed. Let me handle it, Minister Bones, Sirius volunteered without hesitation. Be careful, Sirius, Amelia advised, nodding after a brief pause. Sirius faced the crowd, his expression determined, and handed his wand to Kingsley. Can I come over now? Sirius called out, and after receiving Holt's permission, he approached. Harry watched Sirius, noting the mix of anger and concern in his godfather's eyes. Sirius, Harry called out, moved by the concern he saw. Don't worry, Harry, I'll get you out of here, Sirius assured him, glaring at John. Boy, keep that knife steady, understand? John nodded. Understood, Mr. Black. Oh, you've heard of me? Sirius asked, surprised, but quickly dismissed it, attributing it to his infamous past. Now, hand Bobby over to this Auror. Howell clung to his brother, wary of any trickery from the Ministry. He instructed someone nearby to lift an unconscious companion and bring him to Sirius. Sirius hoisted the villager onto his shoulders, casting a stern look at Luna before carrying the villager away. As Sirius returned, an Auror guarding Minister Bones approached to take the villager, using magic to gently levitate him, to seep through those cracks, casting an eerie glow. The sight was both mesmerizing and terrifying, as if the very essence of life was being drained from him. Get back! Sirius shouted, his voice cutting through the tense air like a knife. The urgency in his tone snapped everyone out of their stupor. The Aurors and Ministry officials, who had been momentarily paralyzed by the unfolding scene, sprang into action, wands at the ready. Atticus Blaine, who had been observing from a distance, felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen many things in his time, but the transformation of a man into something so unnatural was deeply unsettling. He moved quickly, his wand drawn, ready to assist Sirius and the others. The villagers, who had been watching with a mix of curiosity and fear, began to back away, their murmurs growing louder. The atmosphere was charged with tension, as if the very air was holding its breath. "Stay back!" Kingsley bellowed, his voice authoritative and commanding. He positioned himself between the villagers and the unfolding chaos, ensuring their safety. Holt's transformation was accelerating. The cracks on his skin widened, and the white light intensified, casting long shadows on the ground. His eyes, once filled with defiance, were now empty voids, reflecting nothing but the eerie glow emanating from within. Sirius, maintaining his distance, tried to communicate with Holt one last time. "Holt, can you hear me? Fight it!" But it was clear that Holt was beyond reach, his humanity slipping away with each passing second. Luna, now fully herself, stood beside Harry, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "We have to stop it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing commotion. Harry nodded, his resolve hardening. "We will," he replied, gripping his wand tightly. As the situation reached its climax, Atticus Blaine stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Everyone, focus," he called out, his voice steady and reassuring. "We need to contain this before it spreads." With a collective effort, the Aurors and Ministry officials formed a protective circle around Holt, their wands raised in unison. The air crackled with magic as they prepared to cast a containment spell. In that moment, time seemed to slow, each heartbeat echoing like a drum. The villagers watched in awe and fear, their fate hanging in the balance. And then, with a surge of magical energy, the containment spell was cast, enveloping Holt in a shimmering barrier. The white light flickered and pulsed, but the spell held firm, preventing the transformation from spreading further. Sirius, breathing heavily, exchanged a glance with Atticus. "We did it," he said, relief washing over him. Atticus nodded, his expression grave. "For now, but we need to find out who or what is behind this." As the dust settled and the tension eased, the villagers began to disperse, their whispers filled with a mix of gratitude and lingering fear. The ministry officials, led by Minister Bones, began to assess the situation, determined to uncover the truth behind the day's events. And amidst it all, Atticus Blaine stood resolute, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Sirius had never experienced such intense fear before. The air was suddenly charged with an overwhelming surge of magic. He noticed that Holt's vacant eyes were not on him, but fixated on Minister Bones. It was a meticulously planned assassination attempt. Sirius realized this, but the timing was off, as the peculiar villager beside Harry had already seen through the ruse. Amidst a sea of horrified faces, Holt began to charge toward Minister Bones. The air was filled with terrified screams and the crackling sound of spells being cast, all of which echoed in Sirius's ears. This had to be stopped. Sirius shouted, stepping back slightly as he reached out to grab Holt's shoulder. However, another hand intercepted him with lightning speed. It was the elder brother of the unconscious Charles brothers. His head, which had been hanging low, suddenly lifted, revealing a face marred with glowing cracks. This sight plunged Sirius into utter despair. Only one thought echoed in his mind: end. End of this chapter. Chapter 1184. So many things are happening at once. The compacted ground beneath their feet began to tremble slightly, sending countless tiny stones skittering across the surface. A fierce wind whipped through the air. The two Charles brothers, appearing as if they were on the verge of exploding, seemed to have transformed into a vortex, drawing the air around them inward. Harry's piercing scream echoed in the distance, but Sirius had no time to respond. He could only shout, "Don't come over here, Harry." Sirius struggled to free himself from the time bomb that held him captive. The man's arms were like iron bands, impossibly strong, preventing any escape. Helplessly, Sirius watched as Holt advanced toward Minister Bones, step by step. The chaotic magic rendered disapparation impossible. Aurors rushed to Minister Bones' aid, their wands slashing through the air in a desperate attempt to halt Holt's approach. Yet, the barrage of spells fizzled against Holt's bloated chest, extinguished like sparks, having no effect whatsoever. A series of magical barriers sprang up in front of Minister Bones, offering a momentary sigh of relief to the Aurors tasked with her protection. They believed these defenses would surely stop any would-be assassins. However, the fear in Kingsley's eyes remained undiminished. He had encountered this kind of human trap before and knew the impending explosion's terrifying potential. Finished. The same thought crossed both Sirius and Kingsley's minds. The only action left was to stand before Minister Bones, raising their magical shields in a last-ditch effort to buy her a sliver of hope for rescue. Amid the howling wind, Sirius continued to struggle against the human bomb binding him. Suddenly, he ceased his efforts and looked toward the parade, where Harry was desperately trying to escape Luna's grasp. Was it Luna? As the Grim Reaper swung his scythe, this thought surfaced calmly in Sirius's mind. He glanced at Harry, tears streaming down his cheeks, and smiled. "The Dark Lord asked me to send you his regards," Holt sneered, having closed the distance to within 20 feet of the Ministry of Magic team. His mouth, swollen like an oval balloon, twisted into a grin that sent chills through the battle-hardened Aurors. Death has come. Nothing matters anymore, Kingsley thought, closing his eyes warily and surrendering to the blinding light. The brilliance emanating from the Charles brothers overwhelmed everyone's vision. Sirius, Kingsley, and the Aurors shut their eyes, bracing for the explosion that would shake the heavens and earth. Minister Bones might not survive, but the Ministry of Magic would endure, Kingsley reassured himself. There were still Albus and Atticus Blaine in the wizarding world, especially Atticus. Though he had been reluctant, if the Ministry suffered such a blow, Atticus would step forward to assume the role of Minister of Magic. With him, the Ministry would not fall. Kingsley held this belief firmly. "I received Riddle's greetings." A quiet voice pierced the minds of everyone present, without warning. Wow! Sirius, Kingsley, and the Aurors, on the brink of death, endured the searing light and opened their eyes simultaneously. In the endless glow, a blurry black silhouette hovered in midair. Tears welled up in Harry's green eyes once more. Sirius is saved! Endless hope surged through Harry's once desperate heart. Atticus Blaine stood as a shadow against the light. In the air, Kingsley felt an urge to cry, but unlike the others, he wasn't overcome with joy. Instead, a deep sadness filled his eyes. He glanced subconsciously at Sirius. There was no doubt that Minister Bones and his team had been saved, but from that distance, Sirius had no chance of survival. Sirius seemed to understand this as well. He looked up at the shadow and smiled with a sense of relief. What a pity, he thought in his final moments. He had a chance to be your relative, Atticus, but now it's not so bad. He could go meet James and Lily. They would surely be interested in your affairs, Atticus. Atticus Blaine, hovering in midair, surveyed the scene below. The faces, whether ecstatic, sorrowful, or relieved, were all visible to him. Yet, strangely, his eyes remained calm and unaffected. He blinked, then turned his attention to the two civilians on the brink of explosion. Slowly, he extended a hand and pressed it towards the air. The once blazing light softened, and Sirius felt a warm breeze caress his cheek, surprisingly comforting. Was the explosion about to begin? Sirius continued to smile, quietly awaiting the darkness to claim his consciousness. Everyone remained poised, anticipating the explosion. Their thoughts were unified. Mr. Blaine would surely prevent further casualties. He would stop the impending explosion, and the spectacle would be extraordinary. The gentle spring breeze persisted, and people even began to enjoy it. Kingsley was the first to sense something amiss. Observing everything with a calm demeanor, he noticed faint golden lights flickering in the pure white world, like stars. A thin, irregular object floated by on the warm breeze, brushed against Kingsley's face, and shattered upon contact. Time seemed to flow differently. Kingsley instinctively raised his hand, feeling the spot where the fragments had touched. Like a dead leaf stripped of color by flames, only fragile embers remained. More ashes filled the air, resembling cherry blossom petals falling from branches. Kingsley's gaze pierced through the blinding petals, looking ahead. His eyes gradually dulled, and his mouth fell open in disbelief. The Charles brothers had vanished. There was no explosion, no barrier to resist the strong wind, not even a sound. They disappeared silently, leaving only ashes. Kingsley suddenly understood. The wind ceased, and the silence on the drop-off platform was profound. Except for Kingsley, no one realized what had happened. They remained frozen, still waiting for the thunderous explosion. Sirius, too, lay on his back, unaware that the Charles brothers tied to him had vanished. He merely felt a sense of relief, mistaking it for a sign of death. The glaring sun was uncomfortable for his eyes. Sirius rubbed them, as if waking from a dream, and was surprised to find he could move. "Where is everyone?" Sirius asked, his thoughts wandering in a daze as he saw Atticus slowly descending to the ground. "Turn to ashes," Atticus replied calmly. "What about you? Are you hurt?" "I don't think so," Sirius said, looking himself over before raising his head, bewildered. "Why are you here, Atticus? What about the prisoners in Azkaban?" "The last batch of prisoners has been transferred to Avalon Prison. Now only Dementors remain on Azkaban Island. They're quite angry, and my words don't sway them. So I spent some time reinforcing the seal," Atticus explained calmly. End of this chapter. Chapter 1185, The Goal of Struggle. The warm sunshine gently caressed the earth, while a slightly cool breeze swept away the dust. On the drop-off platform, not only the Ministry of Magic, but also the parade team and distant spectators appeared bewildered. Was it truly over? It was no wonder they thought so. The overwhelming power emanating from the brothers, who seemed on the verge of exploding, would have instilled a sense of impending doom in anyone, even those unfamiliar with magic. Yet when Atticus Blaine arrived, the crisis dissipated before anyone could comprehend his actions. A dark shadow darted across the field with incredible speed. Sirius, initially on guard, relaxed as he recognized the figure. With a resounding thud, Harry landed heavily in Sirius's arms, and father and son embraced warmly in front of everyone. "Control all those people," Kingsley commanded, his breath labored as he pointed his wand at the parade, his face displaying an unusual hint of anger. The strikers moved to comply, but Atticus intervened. "There's no need for that," he said, stepping away from Harry and Sirius and approaching Amelia. "How are you, Amelia?" "I can't say it's very good," Amelia replied, drawing her wand to clean the dust from her clothes. She then pointed it at her head, and her disheveled hair obediently gathered into a bun. One of her fingers was bent awkwardly, likely broken during the scuffle. Her hesitant expression suggested she was not adept at handling injuries. Atticus quickly resolved this minor issue for her. "Thanks," Amelia said, adjusting the monocle on her nose. She paused, then raised her voice. "You have saved the Ministry of Magic once again. The cunning of these Death Eaters, like Atticus, is beyond my imagination." Yes, Death Eaters. Whether witnessed or not, this incident could only be attributed to their machinations. "Dumbledore has always reminded us that Voldemort and the Death Eaters excel at plotting," Atticus nodded. Sirius and Harry finally parted. Sirius gazed into Harry's tearful eyes, hesitated, but refrained from asking questions. Instead, he smiled and tousled Harry's hair. "What shall we do with these men, Atticus?" Sirius asked loudly, leading Harry towards him. "They're just some," Harry began, but upon meeting Professor Blaine's gaze, he shrank back guiltily. "This is a great opportunity for us to make the best of a bad situation," Atticus said. "What do you mean?" Amelia frowned. "The plan we discussed. You've always feared it would make the Ministry of Magic appear too strong and provoke a greater backlash. But you see, Minister, the problem must be addressed more decisively," Atticus whispered. "All politicians, regardless of their courage and determination, worry about losing power to some extent. This is why someone like Amelia, despite her bravery, faced controversy over how to tackle large-scale unemployment among the lower classes. However, Atticus emerged as the ultimate victor. "Let's solve this problem today," Amelia sighed. "Since it is not convenient for you to come forward, I will lead the negotiations," Atticus said, appearing much calmer than the troubled Amelia. While Amelia had to consider the Bones family's reputation in the wizarding world, Atticus, being of Muggle origin, had no such concerns. "Where is John?" After transforming into Luna, her clothes no longer fit her body. Luna had to hold up her loose belt with one hand and cover her chest with the other. Despite her awkward appearance, she seemed unfazed and unafraid of any impending punishment. Instead, she looked relaxed and glanced towards Professor Blaine. Her sudden transformation left the villagers bewildered, as they stared at the familiar little girl with wide eyes, stammering in disbelief. "John is safe. He is sleeping at my house now with his wife and daughter," Luna announced, turning slightly with a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Suddenly, a plump woman pointed at Luna's face. "Oh, I recognize you. You live on the hill. You're Mr. Lovegood's daughter, Luna Love. Mr. Blaine is coming." Panic swept through the parade, and many people covered their faces, sobbing in fear. Some attempted to flee, but their legs gave way, leaving them to watch helplessly as Atticus Blaine and several aurors approached. "Don't be afraid, everyone," Luna called out, her voice clear and reassuring. "Professor Blaine won't harm you. He's a good wizard and will fight for the rights you've earned." "Thank you for your confidence, Miss Lovegood," Atticus replied, his tone somber, causing Luna to compose herself. With a wave of his wand, he adjusted Luna's whimsical attire. "What on earth is going on, Luna? Did you kidnap Harry?" Sirius demanded, glaring at her. "Or was this all you're doing?" "Later, Sirius," Atticus interjected calmly, suspecting Luna's intentions were to protect the family of the St. Catchpole villager. "Go stay with Harry and the others," he instructed, but Luna's eyes flickered with determination. "I want to be here with them, Professor Blaine," she insisted. Atticus did not press further. He turned his attention to the villagers, who watched him with fear and anxiety. "Don't worry, everyone," he assured them gently. "It is your right to hold a parade, and the Ministry of Magic will not be angry with you for this. However, the aurors will need to ensure that none of you are connected to the recent attack on the Minister of Magic." The crowd erupted in fervent denials, swearing they had no ties to the Charles brothers. Atticus, understanding their innocence, nodded. "I believe you. We can discuss this later. For now, we need to address another issue." "What is it, Professor Blaine?" Luna asked, stepping forward as if she were the parade's spokesperson. "We need to address the difficulties these villagers are currently facing," Atticus replied, his smile fading as he spoke with calm authority. Soon, Atticus called over the reporters from the distant crowd. "Mr. Blaine, can you share your thoughts on these protesters?" one asked. "Let's discuss the recent attack, Mr. Blaine. Minister Bones was seriously injured, wasn't he? I saw him leave hurriedly under aura protection," another chimed in. "Mr. Blaine, some claim the current unemployment crisis in the wizarding world is due to your provocation of you-know-who and the Death Eaters. How do you respond?" "Mr. Blaine, how do you plan to address the survival issues facing these civilians?" a reporter pressed. Journalists, eager for a story, leaned in, quills poised. Atticus raised his hand, and silence fell. "I invite you all to come forward," he said calmly, "to witness, through the news media, the truth." "Witness what, Mr. Blaine?" a reporter shouted, sensing a major scoop. "Witness that the British Ministry of Magic is not merely a shield for the powerful. On the contrary, the ministry has been striving to ensure that the general public, especially those at the bottom of society, can live decent and comfortable lives." End of this chapter. Chapter 1186, A Rare Wizard. As September approached, the sun, having reached its zenith, began to lose its intensity. The sunlight that bathed the earth was gentle, casting a sleepy spell over those gathered in the square. Tom, the proprietor of the Leaky Cauldron, maneuvered a food cart through the crowd, distributing sandwiches and water to the marchers. More than half of the strikers had been dispatched, while the remainder stayed vigilant, monitoring the civilians seated on the ground. Luna shared with Harry and the others the details of John's family and how she had cleverly used sleeping pills to incapacitate the real John, allowing her to use Polyjuice Potion to infiltrate the parade. "That night, I saw Lucius Malfoy at Egwene and Bona's house, and I suspected a conspiracy," Luna recounted, skipping over her report to Professor Blaine at the Ministry of Magic. "I consulted my father, and he supported my plan to replace John. He even helped me acquire the Polyjuice Potion I used." "Your dad is incredible," Ron exclaimed, his face full of admiration. "If I tried something like that, my parents would skin me alive." "That's the right thing to do, Ron," Sirius interjected, his expression serious. "You've seen how dangerous this situation is. If Atticus hadn't arrived in time, the number of injured would have overwhelmed the healers at St. Mungo's." "Sirius." Harry's concern shifted to another matter. "Since Luna can confirm that Lucius Malfoy is behind this, why isn't the Ministry taking action?" "It's complicated," Sirius replied after a pause. "To convict Lucius Malfoy, the Ministry needs concrete evidence, Harry." Seeing Harry's frustration, Hermione added bluntly, "What Luna told us isn't enough for the Ministry to arrest Lucius Malfoy." "You didn't actually see Malfoy's face, did you, Luna?" Luna blinked her silver eyes and nodded slightly, acknowledging Hermione's point. Harry slumped back in his chair, his face clouded with frustration. Sirius had nearly lost his life, yet the perpetrator remained free, which was infuriating. Suddenly, Harry recalled the unsavory encounter he had with Draco and considered sharing it, but Luna and Lavender's presence made him hesitate. "Serious," Hermione said softly, casting a quick glance at Professor Blaine, who was settling Old Tom's bill. She hesitated, then asked, "Professor Blaine has summoned all the heads of those workshops. Do you think he intends to order them to resume work so the workers can earn a living?" Harry, eager for a solution, asked, "Is that possible?" "I'm afraid it's unlikely," Sirius replied, disappointing everyone. "Although the move is despicable, it's not illegal for those pureblood families loyal to Voldemort to close their workshops." Strikers emerged from the fireplace, accompanied by well-dressed noble wizards. Harry noticed their worried expressions. They weren't surprised by the crowd in the square, but they regarded Professor Blaine with apprehension. Malfoy's mother, Harry noted with surprise, as Narcissa Malfoy, who had just left with Draco, was summoned back by the beater. She surveyed the scene warily, her gaze turning icy as it swept over them. "Welcome, welcome." Atticus Blaine greeted the upper-class wizards with a surprising smile. Many would have expected him to be stern after such a dreadful incident, but he maintained a cordial demeanor. "You are all esteemed members of the British wizarding world. I apologize for taking up your valuable time." Atticus Blaine left the uneasy civilians behind and strode confidently into the square, wearing a friendly smile. He opened his arms wide, welcoming the influential figures from various corners of the British wizarding world who were arriving one by one. Among them was Narcissa, along with other esteemed wizards who were somehow connected to the Sacred 28. They all regarded Atticus Blaine with cautious eyes, as if he were an old friend, yet their gazes were tinged with doubt. Deep down, they knew that Blaine's welcome was not as genuine as it appeared. Atticus, however, paid no mind to their somber expressions. His warm smile remained unwavering. "I would like to thank you all for responding to my invitation, as well as that of the Ministry of Magic, to gather here today. We are here to discuss how to revive the declining British wizarding industry and business community." Narcissa lowered her proud gaze, concealing her fear of Atticus Blaine. It was hard to fathom that such a formidable man existed in the British magical world, one who possessed unparalleled strength, wisdom, and skill. The Malfoy family had served the Dark Lord for over 20 years, and there was no doubt that he was a fearsome wizard. The Death Eaters believed the Dark Lord to be the most powerful wizard who had ever lived. Although Narcissa did not entirely agree with this sentiment, she acknowledged that he was among the few exceptionally powerful wizards in the world. The only ones who could rival the Dark Lord were Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine. In terms of skill and wisdom, Narcissa believed that Voldemort, in his early years, might have been as capable as Dumbledore and Blaine. However, as the Dark Lord's power grew and his ambitions intensified, he gained more followers and became increasingly reliant on cruelty and fear as tools of control. In these aspects, he fell short compared to Dumbledore and Blaine. While Dumbledore was bound by his steadfast adherence to order, Blaine never hesitated to wield his extraordinary magical powers. Yet, he always found a reasonable and legal pretext to exercise his influence, making it impossible to fault him. His focus on interests marked him as a true Slytherin, but he was neither greedy nor selfish. He excelled at forming alliances, and many radical actions that seemed unlikely to gain support eventually did, thanks to his wisdom. His political acumen was evident in his successful maneuvering to have Amelia Bones appointed as minister. Although the ministry tried to conceal the circumstances surrounding Fudge and Umbridge's resignations, the truth was no secret to the powerful Death Eaters. From the events of Harry Potter's trial, it was clear that Atticus Blaine had likely uncovered compromising information about Fudge and Umbridge. Yet, he remained silent, biding his time. In hindsight, the deteriorating relationship between the Ministry of Magic and Hogwarts was likely orchestrated by Blaine himself. Narcissa stole a glance at the young man, who was smiling as he conjured a long table and several chairs out of thin air. A strange light flickered in her eyes. It was astonishing that such a powerful and intimidating wizard was only in his 20s. In this regard, neither the Dark Lord, Dumbledore, nor even the one from Nurmengard could compare to Atticus Blaine. He was a once-in-a-millennium prodigy. "Please take a seat, Mrs. Malfoy," Atticus invited. Whether they wished to or not, the summoned wizards had no choice but to comply and take their seats. Atticus Blaine observed Narcissa, a smile playing in his eyes as he noticed her deep in thought. "We may need to have a conversation. Is there something about this environment that's making you uncomfortable?" he inquired gently. "It's not that, Mr. Blaine," Narcissa began, knowing it was unwise to stir up trouble at this moment. She bowed slightly to Atticus and pulled out a chair to sit down. On one side of the room, a large group of people in tattered clothing sat on the ground, while on the other side, impeccably dressed pureblood nobles anxiously awaited Mr. Atticus Blaine's next move. The contrast was striking, and the scene was undeniably captivating. Reporters eagerly clicked their cameras, determined to capture this historic moment. Some had already envisioned the headline for the next day's edition of the Daily Prophet. "So," Atticus said, turning his back to the common folk and facing the elite of the British wizarding world, a slight smile on his lips. "Let's get started." End of chapter. Chapter 1187, The Plaza Accord, 1. Let me first inform you of the current situation. Atticus Blaine began, not expecting to witness such fervent speeches at a public gathering. He observed the heads of prominent industrial workshops in the British wizarding world, their hands clasped tightly. "As you can see, there is a demonstration occurring here, and the people behind me are the participants." Many followed Blaine's gestures, casting quick, disdainful glances at the workers before refocusing on Blaine, who spoke with ease. Just moments ago, while Minister Bones was negotiating with them, two individuals attacked her. They used their bodies as vessels for dark magic, attempting to assassinate Minister Bones and inflict severe harm on the Ministry of Magic's elite. Fortunately, this was thwarted. Atticus interlaced his fingers on the table before him, his tone steady, his gaze measured. Although a detailed investigation is pending, it is initially determined that this was an organized and premeditated terrorist attack. Having said this, Atticus fell silent, observing the people at the conference table until they grew uneasy. Narcissa maintained a stoic expression, though she secretly frowned. It was uncertain how many were aware of the attack on Bones beforehand, but Narcissa was confident that those questioned alongside her were informed. She had initially believed that Atticus had summoned them with great fanfare to address the widespread shutdowns in the workshops. "Excuse me, Mr. Blaine." A wizard, no older than 30 and wearing a black bow tie, was the first to crack under Atticus's intense gaze. He tugged at his tie, his breathing heavy. "There has been a terrorist attack on the Minister of Magic. I think this is something no one here wants to see, but you had the Aurors invite us here. In my opinion, this is completely unreasonable." Most participants remained silent, with only a few murmurs of agreement. "Why?" Atticus tilted his head slightly, regarding this distant relative of the Greengrass family with interest. "Why?" The complaining wizard forced a laugh, but the sweat beading on his temples in the sunlight betrayed his nervousness. "Do you think we orchestrated the attack on the Minister of Magic? Otherwise, why summon us?" "That's a reasonable guess, isn't it?" Atticus smiled, observing the group eager to assert their innocence. He spoke calmly. "Mr. Callum, I believe you heard what I just said. This case is still under investigation, but as the owners of the workshops where these workers were employed, it's entirely possible you are involved. This is a reasonable assumption." "This is a gross slander, Mr. Blaine." Callum, a man with a broad face and dry yellow hair, struggled to contain his anger. "You cannot accuse us of being involved in the attack on the minister without any evidence." He glanced at the reporters, snapping photos, his face paling. "Of course, the Ministry of Magic won't convict anyone based on speculation." Atticus shook his head slightly. "I am emphasizing this matter here to inform you that the Ministry of Magic will not easily let off the heinous criminals who dare to plan an attack on the Minister of Magic. All suspects will be investigated, and the department will not wrongly accuse good people, nor will it allow the murderer to go unpunished." Narcissa immediately pursed her lips, her heart growing cold. Except for one or two wizards unfamiliar with Blaine, everyone present understood his implication. In this terrorist attack against the minister, they would all be scrutinized as suspects by the ministry. Secondly, who is the mastermind behind the attack? This is a matter for the ministry to decide. This was clearly a threat, setting the stage for what Atticus Blaine really wanted to discuss next. The wizards present at the meeting might not have been the most intelligent, but they were certainly cunning and well-versed in conspiracies and tricks. With just a hint of guidance from Atticus, they quickly grasped his intentions. It was no wonder Blaine wanted to negotiate with them on this occasion and allowed reporters to listen in. The results of the investigation into this case will be published in the Daily Prophet as soon as there is progress. For now, let's stop here. Atticus maintained a stoic expression. I asked you all to come here primarily for the livelihoods of the people behind me. This issue has been troubling the Ministry of Magic for some time. Today, we need to discuss a feasible plan to resolve it. Narcissa clenched her fists under the table. I need you to get back to work as soon as possible. Atticus didn't elaborate further. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes deep and authority etched on his youthful face. At that moment, the incessant shudder sounds reached a small crescendo. The civilians behind Atticus looked nervously and almost pleadingly at the high and mighty figures at the conference table, hoping for a positive response. I'm afraid that's difficult to do, Mr. Blaine, a wizard with slicked-back hair said, wiping sweat from his brow with a handkerchief. His dry lips moved as he spoke with difficulty. Narcissa's eyes flickered to the wizard who was speaking. The Knot family. Their losses were even greater than those of the Greengrass family, as the patriarch of the Knot family had been captured by the Ministry of Magic during the war. Soft, intermittent sobbing sounds came from the huddled civilians. Atticus heard it but chose to ignore it. He wasn't angered by the public rejection. Instead, he regarded the speaker with a look of genuine pressure. What's the reason? Atticus asked calmly. We are having trouble operating, Mr. Blaine, the Knot family's spokesperson said, looking as if he might collapse, yet he still gritted his teeth and voiced his opinion. The entire wizarding world was watching this negotiation. They couldn't afford to remain inactive and had to express their opinions clearly. If they made a promise but failed to deliver, they would face criticism from the entire wizarding world. Business is facing difficulties, Atticus said, the corners of his mouth curling into a cold smile. He looked at each face at the conference table one by one. What about the rest of you? What's your answer? No one dared to remain silent, as silence would be seen as agreement with Atticus Blaine's request. Even if they were thrown into Azkaban and had to live with the eight-eyed spiders, they had to fight to the end. The participants all gave a negative answer, including Narcissa. Several workshops and companies in the UK owned by the Malfoy family gave a clear rejection. Despair appeared on the simple faces of the people who were full of expectations, and suppressed sobs rose one after another. Even the reporters, who usually thrived on drama, fell silent and glared at the participants angrily. Oh, they are all from the pure-blooded 28 clans. I curse them to die soon, one reporter muttered through clenched teeth, but was immediately reminded by a colleague. Keep your voice down, Romilda. You should know that we are also working for the pure-blood masters. The sobbing sounds lingering in Harry's ears also made him indignant. He stared at them with hatred and prayed in his heart that Professor Blaine would kill them all. The sudden thought in his mind startled Harry. The Ministry of Magic has received strong support from the goblins. Why can't they just give them some money? Ron asked quietly. It was rare for Hermione to agree with him, but she nodded vigorously, her eyes fixed expectantly on Sirius. The ministry might be able to support them temporarily, but in the long run, they need to be self-sufficient, Ron, Sirius replied, shaking his head with a somber expression. What should be done? How does Mr. Blaine plan to handle this situation? Hermione wondered aloud. Are you all facing business difficulties? Atticus Blaine interjected with a chuckle. If that's the case, please share the details with us. The enterprises and workshops you manage are the backbone of the wizarding world. The Ministry of Magic won't ignore your plight. End of this chapter. Chapter 1188, Plaza Accord 1. When everyone present heard Atticus Blaine declare that he would help them resolve their business issues, they realized the gravity of the situation. Atticus demanded a thorough explanation for the widespread shutdowns occurring under the scrutiny of the entire wizarding world. He was determined not to let them off without a reasonable justification. Narcissa Malfoy frowned slightly, caught in a dilemma. Before the Dark Lord's resurrection, her husband had sent a letter to Atticus, and the implications of that letter were clear. Although Lucius never mentioned any further communication with Atticus, Narcissa was aware that her husband had secretly aligned himself with Atticus's camp. Yet, they still needed to display loyalty to the Dark Lord. Thus, on an occasion like today, she had to confront Atticus directly. Even if she ultimately had to keep the workshop open, she needed to appear as though she had no choice but to agree. If the ministry truly intends to assist us, Narcissa began after a moment's silence, raising her head and bowing gracefully, Mr. Blaine, our business is indeed facing insurmountable difficulties. Atticus smiled and extended his hand in a welcoming gesture. You are welcome, Mrs. Malfoy. The Malfoy family's business empire was renowned, even among many pure-blood families. Seeing Narcissa Malfoy step forward, the wizards at the meeting breathed a sigh of relief and looked at her expectantly. The decline in orders, Mr. Blaine. Narcissa spoke with strong confidence in her familiar domain. Since the return of the Dark Lord, the British wizarding world has been in turmoil, impacting even the magical civilizations of European countries. Magical communities worldwide are concerned about the current state of the British wizarding world. They fear we won't deliver goods on time, wasting the deposits they've paid us. Consequently, buyers who once purchased from us now prefer to pay more for inferior goods. Without new orders, the workshop cannot operate. There is nothing we can do, Mr. Blaine. All eyes turned to Atticus Blaine, eager to hear his response. That sounds. Hermione looked at Sirius hesitantly. Doesn't seem like an excuse. What do you think, Sirius? If it were Remus, he might have an answer for you, Hermione, Sirius replied, looking displeased. I'm not very good at business. Everyone present watched Atticus cautiously. What Mrs. Malfoy said was true, but not entirely. Their workshops were renowned worldwide, especially for producing flue powder, unmatched in the global wizarding world. While the turbulent situation had affected operations, it wasn't as dire as portrayed. The workshop closures were essentially a result of the conflict between Atticus and the Dark Lord, and those attending the meeting didn't truly wish for the workshops to shut down. After all, who would turn away from the allure of gold galleons? Anything else, Mrs. Malfoy? Atticus's calm smile left Narcissa momentarily dazed. She had the impression that Atticus wanted her to reveal more. The workshop is running low on funds, Mr. Blaine, Narcissa continued, pursing her lips, her words garnering another wave of approval. Operating funds? Does she mean the Malfoy family is out of money? Harry remarked incredulously. How absurd. I bet the Malfoy family has more gold stored in Gringotts than the Ministry of Magic's vault. Shameless lie, some onlookers in the square shouted. Who would believe this? Oh, you who run so many workshops are out of money. For a time, criticism was rampant. It had been quite some time before they decided to temporarily close. Narcissa raised her voice, her frustration evident. Many workshops under the Malfoy family name are suffering continuous losses. We have taxes to pay to the Ministry of Magic, salaries for our workers, and payments due to our suppliers for raw materials. Yet, we can't secure new orders. Every day we remain idle costs us dearly. Therefore, after careful consideration, the Malfoy family has decided to temporarily close the workshop. We will resume production once the situation stabilizes and the global magical community regains confidence in the British wizarding world. Our situation is even more dire, Mr. Blaine. Callum, the representative of the Greengrass family, interjected, standing up once more. The ministry accuses Mr. Greengrass of being a Death Eater loyal to you-know-who. I won't comment on that, but you all understand the severe blow this deals to our family's reputation. Partners who once trusted us now doubt our integrity. I fear that even if the chaos subsides and the wizarding world flourishes again, our workshop will remain tainted by this scandal. Callum turned to face the reporter's cameras, his expression a mix of truth and exaggeration. It's very likely our workshop will never recover, forcing us to make difficult choices. Mr. Blaine, you know our workshop belongs to the Knott family. Another wizard with slicked-back hair stood up, his eyes filled with sorrow. Our situation is even more dire than the Greengrass family's. This was indeed true. While old Greengrass was still wanted, old Knot had just been taken to his new home today. Atticus Blaine maintained a smile, tinged with a hint of dark humor. Everyone at the conference was either directly affiliated with one of the 28 pureblood families or closely connected to them in some way. What they shared was their allegiance to Voldemort. The Ministry of Magic's greatest challenge was the impact of the ongoing conflict between Atticus and Voldemort on another front. However, the outcome of this battle was never in doubt. From the start, Atticus had orchestrated the situation, even manipulating Voldemort into opening this new front. The resources held by these pureblood families were like the sword of Damocles hanging over the wizarding world. Atticus sought to change this, leading to the current scene. The representatives of the various factions were no longer reserved, rushing to voice their grievances, as if it were a miracle their workshops had lasted this long. Atticus remained patient, listening to complaints from all sides. Generally, the issues boiled down to three main points: lack of orders, lack of operating funds, and lack of security. Of course, both parties in the negotiations knew these were mere excuses for the temporary closures. The protesters appeared increasingly bewildered as they listened to the gentleman's complaints. It seemed these once powerful figures were now struggling more than the common folk, as if they were the ones being unreasonable. "All right," Atticus finally interjected, raising a hand to halt the ongoing complaints. "I understand all the information you've provided. Now, let's address these problems." End of this chapter. Chapter 1189, The Plaza Accord, Part 1. When Atticus Blaine raised his hand, the room fell silent. The anger that had filled the conference table moments before seemed to dissipate as if it had been nothing more than a fleeting jest. The attendees, including reporters, onlookers, Ministry of Magic employees, and several young wizards, turned their eyes toward Atticus with a mix of hope and desperation. Despite their earlier criticisms, they now yearned for Atticus, the most powerful wizard of the contemporary era, to take charge and guide them. Atticus's gaze was fixed on Narcissa, who stood across the table. He could sense the tension and panic coursing through her. "Let me confirm with you first," he began, his voice steady and commanding. "The only obstacles we face in resuming work at the workshop, our immediate goal, are the ones you just mentioned, correct?" His words hung in the air, carrying a weight that seemed even more daunting than facing Voldemort himself. Narcissa swallowed hard, her throat constricting with anxiety, and nodded hesitantly. The other participants, seeing the Malfoy family's reluctant agreement, quickly followed suit. The sentiment was clear. If they were to shut down, they would do so together, and if they were to reopen, it would be a collective effort. Neither the Ministry of Magic nor the mysterious forces at play could target them all. "Very good," Atticus said, nodding with satisfaction as he observed the consensus forming around him. He tapped his fingers rhythmically on the table, a calm yet authoritative gesture. "Now, let's address the global magical community's pessimism regarding the British wizarding world's recovery from its current turmoil. I cannot promise you, nor can I assure the world's magical civilization, how long it will take to restore peace. It could be a matter of months, or it might stretch into years as it did before. However, regardless of the timeline, the basic needs of our people must be met. Producers and consumers alike require essential materials to continue their lives. No one can endure the exorbitant cost of 12 silver sickles per ounce of flu powder." Several attendees shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Flubang, the company responsible for producing flu powder, was too vast to be monopolized by a single entity. "The Ministry of Magic has a duty to ensure the availability of these essential supplies," Atticus continued, his tone unwavering. "Therefore, you need not worry about production orders. The Ministry will establish an international trade department, which will directly place orders with your workshops." Narcissa's eyes widened in surprise. The Ministry of Magic, setting up an international trade department to place direct orders with the workshops? What would follow? Surely, the Ministry wouldn't hoard these supplies. They would release them to the market at reasonable prices to stabilize the economy. Narcissa felt a flicker of hope. "What price will the Ministry of Magic pay for the products produced by each workshop?" she inquired, her voice tinged with curiosity. Atticus smiled, his eyes meeting hers. "The price will be calculated based on the average of your shipments to the domestic terminal market over the past 5 years." Narcissa fell silent, contemplating the implications. This arrangement ensured that the workshops wouldn't incur losses, while the Ministry of Magic stood to gain a profit. In essence, the Ministry would act as the exclusive agent for each workshop, securing sole authorization. With the market in need of supplies, the Ministry wouldn't struggle to sell what it acquired. It could dynamically adjust order quantities according to demand, ensuring a steady flow of goods and a stable market. Both parties were acutely aware that the turbulent situation had indeed impacted sales, but claiming there were no orders was a blatant falsehood. The Ministry didn't need to make any market forecasts. Numerous domestic and international sales outlets would directly approach the Ministry of Magic to place orders. All the Ministry needed to do was forward these orders to the workshop. It was both cunning and intimidating. Narcissa's eyes flickered with apprehension as she looked at Atticus Blaine, despite his silent smile. His strategy had not only exposed their deceit, but also secured significant advantages for the department, greatly amplifying its influence. If all workshop orders originated from the Ministry of Magic, it meant the Ministry could dictate 100% of their production share, effectively controlling efficiency. This might be acceptable as a short-term wartime policy, but if continued post-war, it would allow the Ministry to seize control of all workshops without conflict. Many faces flushed with realization as they recognized the trap within Blaine's proposal. "Your proposal is truly brilliant, Mr. Blaine," Narcissa said after a few quick breaths, her lips tightening. "But I have a question, if I may." "Please, go ahead, Mrs. Malfoy," Atticus replied gracefully. "This plan does have potential, but, excuse me," Narcissa paused, taking a breath. "The Ministry's policy seems aimed at stabilizing the domestic market, but you must realize this only ensures our workshops maintain basic activity. Without the vast foreign market, many workshops, including the Malfoy families, will inevitably shrink, leading to—" She glanced at the eager civilians behind Blaine. "Large-scale layoffs to secure minimal profits." "Oh, Mrs. Malfoy, you're so pessimistic." Atticus's smile widened. "Previously, your workshops couldn't accept international orders due to the volatile situation in the British wizarding world, which could spiral out of control at any moment. Your private businesses lacked security, causing cooperation to falter. However, the Ministry of Magic's decisive victory in the Battle of Diagon Alley has restored some confidence in the international market." "Some is not enough, Mr. Blaine," Narcissa retorted sharply. "The Ministry will actively negotiate with all parties to attract orders for the workshops. The British Ministry of Magic will endorse these transactions, which I believe will reassure the international market," Atticus continued, unfazed by Narcissa's business acumen. "Furthermore, for every international transaction, the Ministry will collaborate with the insurance department that Gringotts is soon to establish. The Ministry will provide insurance for these transactions, ensuring that if war or any force majeure prevents timely delivery, Gringotts will compensate both parties for their losses. I believe this will satisfy all involved," Atticus concluded with a smile. The mention of Gringotts' insurance business left Narcissa and everyone else at the meeting bewildered. This was the first they had heard of such a venture. After some contemplation, Narcissa had to concede that Blaine's plan was simply outstanding. With the British wizarding government backing it and Gringotts offering compensation for any mishaps, Narcissa envisioned the Ministry of Magic's reception hall bustling with wizards from around the world eager to collaborate. The workshop's business was destined to thrive. There was a glimmer of regret in Narcissa's eager eyes. The only downside was that they had to operate under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Magic and couldn't work independently. They had already announced that the workshop was closed due to a lack of orders, so Atticus Blaine suggested that the Ministry of Magic step in to facilitate the transaction. "And what about the funding?" Callum asked, his curiosity piqued, momentarily forgetting his position. His face was alight with interest. Do you plan to persuade Gringotts to grant us a low-interest or interest-free loan to kickstart our workshop's operations? Oh, regarding that, Atticus leaned back in his chair, a subtle smile playing on his lips. My proposal is for the Ministry of Magic to directly inject funds into your workshops. Direct capital injection? Callum was taken aback. Are you saying the Ministry of Magic wants to invest in our workshop? Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, Atticus cleared his throat, finally revealing his true intentions. That's right, he affirmed with a nod, his voice rising slightly. It's an investment to safeguard the basic livelihood of the people. Since the workshop lacks the working capital to resume production, the Ministry of Magic should lend a helping hand. Of course. Atticus paused for emphasis. The ministry isn't doing charity. It must control a portion of the shares. As he surveyed the silent crowd, Atticus smiled calmly. That makes sense, doesn't it, everyone? End of this chapter. Chapter 1190, The Plaza Accord. Conclusion. At the drop-off platform in Diagon Alley, the participants of the emergency consultation meeting sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the table as if expecting it to bloom with answers. The Ministry of Magic's decision to invest in the workshop by purchasing shares had left them speechless. Narcissa's lips twitched, hinting at a desire to speak, but she ultimately held her tongue. In truth, it was not unusual for workshops and companies to seek funding. Many of the prominent businesses in the British wizarding world had started as ventures owned by pure-blood families. Over decades, or even centuries, mergers and expansions had made sole ownership a rarity. The business landscape had become a complex web of shared interests. Take the Malfoy family, for instance. While they remained the largest shareholders in their enterprises, they often collaborated with various parties, including foreign investors. Some of these investors were high-ranking officials within the Ministry of Magic, such as Cornelius Fudge and Dolores Umbridge, who had been introduced by Atticus Blaine. These officials and their families were stakeholders, safeguarding these renowned workshops both overtly and covertly. Even Amelia Bones, the current minister, had relatives benefiting from these profits. However, Narcissa's brow furrowed, and her lips tightened. The British Ministry of Magic's decision to establish the International Trade Department as a direct investor, actively participating in the workshop's operations and management, was unprecedented in the magical world. Such actions were more common among Muggles. Regardless, everyone agreed that this was not a positive development. Many attendees cast sidelong glances at Atticus Blaine, who sat with a faint smile, and felt a growing resentment. Blaine's proposal was not about aiding the workshop's production. They didn't require assistance. Nor was it merely about boosting the ministry's revenue. His true aim was to dismantle the business empires that pure-blood families had painstakingly built over centuries. By the way, Atticus interjected with a casual tone, next month, the first task of the newly established Supervision Department will be to require all Ministry of Magic employees, including department directors and above, to divest their shareholding assets. From now on, high-level officials will be prohibited from making such investments. The participants' faces were blank with shock. Was this an attempt to sever the entrenched interests between ministry officials and themselves? This alone wouldn't suffice. Atticus, with his immense mental acuity, sensed the chaotic fragments of their thoughts. He knew this measure would have limited impact, but he had to proceed with caution, like boiling a frog in warm water. The Ministry of Magic was beset with internal and external challenges, necessitating a gradual approach. Being too aggressive would not only alienate support, but also risk his reputation, likening him to Voldemort. Reflecting on this, Atticus felt a strange gratitude for Voldemort's existence. The chaos Voldemort had sown made Atticus's actions appear less radical. "So what do you think?" Atticus inquired. Narcissa clenched her fists and gritted her teeth, struggling against the overwhelming pressure from Atticus Blaine, as formidable as mountains and rivers. Was there really a choice? If given the option, no one would willingly agree with Blaine's plan. Have a plan, but under the watchful eyes of the public, do they have any choice? If they refuse, they must provide Atticus Blaine and the entire magical world with a reasonable explanation. Otherwise, their workshops and companies will never have the chance to reopen. After all, they had publicly raised concerns about order shortages and a lack of working capital. Now, Atticus had presented a reasonable solution on behalf of the Ministry of Magic, yet they refused to accept it. This was utterly unacceptable. Moreover, did they really think that when Atticus initiated the negotiations, he mentioned the attack on Amelia Bones, the Minister of Magic, merely as a polite notice? If they dared to refuse, the ministry would likely soon announce to the wizarding world the ironclad evidence that they had colluded with the Death Eaters to murder the Minister of Magic. Atticus Blaine is not Dumbledore. He is certainly capable of doing this. Many participants were feeling both sad and angry in their hearts. Furthermore, how could these business operators not be aware of this? How could they not have touched upon the forbidden areas of the law while supporting such a vast business empire? In the past, as long as you maintained a good relationship with the higher-ups in the department, they would turn a blind eye. Things are different now. Perhaps they could use the burn-together approach to involve the Bones family, making the incumbent Amelia Bones afraid to take any action. But Atticus Blaine, who was born into a Muggle family, had no taboos. They couldn't find any evidence against Blaine, nor could they eliminate him. They were badly tricked by the mysterious man. The operators who were concerned about their family businesses roared in their hearts, including Narcissa. She could already foresee that Blaine would never stop here, and the family's businesses in the UK would likely be reduced to only 1/10 of what they had left in the future. "May I ask you one more question, Mr. Blaine?" Narcissa's voice suddenly became hoarse. "How much money does the ministry intend to inject into each workshop? And," she took a few quick breaths, "how many shares do you intend to take?" "Oh, don't say that, Mrs. Malfoy," Atticus said amiably. "It's as if the Ministry of Magic is plotting against your assets, heh." Atticus laughed a few times merrily, but no one else joined in his laughter. As for your question just now, seeing that his joke had no effect, Atticus coughed twice in embarrassment. "The ministry's finances are also tight, so I'm afraid I won't be able to provide much support. The only goal is to ensure that the workshops can resume work and maintain daily operations. This will be determined by the experts of the International Trade Department, which is being established after investigating the situation of each company. As for the stock price," Atticus pondered for a moment, "it will also be finalized after consultation between the International Trade Department, Gringotts financial experts, and all of you." Everyone breathed a sigh of relief. Although the noose was already around their necks, Atticus Blaine seemed to have no intention of swallowing them whole, flesh and bones included, in the short term. "Excuse me, the Ministry of Magic's International Trade Department will be headed by—" Narcissa thought further and asked smartly, "Piers Thickness of the Department of International Magical Cooperation will serve as acting head of the department, Remus Lupin will serve as deputy, and Gulson Barna will serve as advisor." Atticus quietly released another piece of significant news. "Bah, a lowly werewolf and an old green monkey." Narcissa spat secretly, then nodded. "What a wise decision, Mr. Blaine. So, I think we've reached an agreement, right?" Atticus stood up from his chair and smiled at the participants, who followed his lead and stood up one after another. Atticus Blaine had overcome numerous challenges and had vigorously championed the restoration of the British wizarding industry and commerce to their former glory. As cameras focused intently on their faces, the participants managed expressions that were a peculiar mix of tears and smiles. "We need an agreement to bear witness to the consensus we've reached today," Atticus exclaimed joyfully. With a flourish of his wand, he conjured a quill poised in an ink bottle and a large notebook with a black cover adorned in gold foil onto the conference table. Narcissa glanced at the notebook and felt a sudden pang of anxiety. She realized that all the clauses drafted during the day's consultation were already inscribed within its pages. Amid the cheers echoing from the square outside and under Atticus's delighted gaze, the participants signed their names on the agreement, seemingly, willingly, one by one. Finally, the Plaza Accord was placed before Atticus. In that moment, even he couldn't suppress a slight flutter of excitement. He gazed at the elegantly penned names on the paper, took a deep breath, and picked up the quill to sign his name in the blank space at the end. "You will change the wizarding world," he thought to himself. After signing, Atticus looked at the words Plaza Accord embossed in gold, smiled, and a fleeting thought crossed his mind. End of this chapter. Chapter 1191. Settlement of Accounts After Autumn Cheers. Congratulations and praises echoed throughout the drop-off platform square. The crowd celebrated not only another significant achievement by the Ministry of Magic, but also an encouraging policy announced by Atticus Blaine at an impromptu press conference. "What I can tell you is that the Ministry of Magic, under Minister Bones, has always prioritized the welfare of the people," Atticus declared with a confident smile. "The ministry will issue living allowances to low-income families within the British wizarding community. We are currently assessing the number of permanent British families, and I believe you will soon witness the implementation of this policy." His announcement sparked a wave of excitement among the attendees. "Oh, low-income family subsidies. I can't believe the ministry would do that," exclaimed a female reporter with blonde, curly hair. "Mr. Blaine, is there a chance this policy will be implemented within this year?" "I'm not going to lie, folks," Atticus replied. "This year may be challenging. The ministry aims to establish a registry of impoverished families and begin dispersing the first batch of subsidies by June next year at the latest." "Low-income family subsidies," Ron murmured absent-mindedly among the young wizards at the back of the crowd. "It's incredible. Mom will be so happy." "Oh, this may not concern your family, Ron," Hermione said, gazing at Professor Blaine on the podium with admiration. "Professor Blaine won't let your family exploit this." "Exploit a loophole?" Harry was taken aback, while Ron glared at Hermione. "What do you mean, Hermione? Are you saying our family exploits loopholes?" "Oh, sorry, Ron. That was poorly phrased," Hermione apologized, looking at Ron with regret. "I meant, objectively speaking, Mr. Weasley's income isn't low, right? Your situation is only difficult because—" "Ah, I see," Ron nodded grimly. "It's just because there are so many of us." Harry pursed his lips, smiling slightly. "So, Mr. Blaine, how will the Ministry of Magic define a low-income family?" A reporter's question redirected the young wizard's attention. "The specific criteria are still under discussion," Atticus replied, surrounded by reporters. "The initial agreement is that a household income of less than 150 galleons per year qualifies. As for the subsidy amount, it requires complex, precise calculations. I'm sorry I can't provide more details at this time." This policy is undoubtedly a lifeline for families enduring years of poverty. Although Atticus couldn't elaborate further, reporters continued to probe for more details. "Does the Ministry of Magic have additional supportive policies for the poor, Mr. Blaine?" Some reporters waved their arms eagerly to catch Atticus's attention. "Oh, that's an interesting question," Atticus acknowledged, giving the young reporter an approving nod. He gestured for everyone to look at the field beneath their feet, which stretched into a golden expanse with hints of green. "I believe you've heard that the restoration of Diagon Alley will commence soon. This is an unprecedented project in the world's magical civilization. Preliminary estimates suggest the project could span several decades. For such a massive undertaking, the department cannot allocate all its employees as it did for last year's Quidditch World Cup stadium construction. During this project, the Ministry of Magic will only send a limited number of wizards to provide auxiliary guidance. The specifics: construction work required significant assistance from the non-magical community within the British Wizarding Society. I believe this collaboration will ultimately boost the job market and enhance the quality of life for many low-income families interested in investing in engineering and construction." The impactful information that Atticus Blaine shared did not deter the reporters. They continued to bombard him with questions, not allowing him to conclude the impromptu press conference. Fortunately, the weather came to Atticus's aid. A dark cloud drifted overhead, blocking the sunlight and providing a welcome coolness to the square, where the atmosphere was heated with anticipation. Most of the attendees invited by Atticus had already left, but a few remained, listening with somber expressions as he extolled the Ministry of Magic's effective governance. Meanwhile, the villagers involved in the earlier parade were escorted back to the ministry by Kingsley and Sirius. Given the gravity of the attack on the minister, the Aurors were obligated to investigate the participants thoroughly. As expected, the Auror office faced several sleepless nights ahead. When Atticus Blaine finally announced the end of the press conference, the crowd erupted in protests and sighs of disappointment. "Let's go," Hermione said, though she still hoped to hear more. She knew Professor Blaine's temperament well enough to understand he had shared all he intended to. With a slight sigh of disappointment, she turned to Harry and Ron. "I left all my things at Flourish and Blots. I need you to come with me to get them." "Oh, can't you just go by yourself?" Lavender, clinging to Ron's arm like a vine, was clearly displeased with Hermione's request. "I do have to go to Flourish and Blots, Lavender," Ron explained, his ears turning red with embarrassment under Hermione's disdainful gaze. "Harry and I haven't bought our new textbooks and supplementary materials yet." "I can go with you," Luna chimed in cheerfully, relieved that the villagers' issues had been resolved. "I also need to buy new books, but I don't have much money." "Don't worry, Luna. I can lend you some," Hermione said, taking Luna's hand warmly. Harry suddenly remembered he hadn't purchased his own books yet, having been sidetracked by Malfoy. After a brief hesitation, he decided to wait until they returned to Grimmauld Place that evening to discuss it with Hermione and Ron. "By the way," Harry said, glancing at Ron and Lavender, who were engrossed in conversation. For some reason, Ginny's face flashed in his mind. He didn't think much of it and asked curiously, "Has anyone seen Fred and George? Mrs. Weasley went shopping with Ginny earlier. Where could they be?" Ron paled. "Don't worry about Fred and George. They're smarter than anyone. But Mum and Ginny, they might have apparated back to the old house during the riot. She'll be furious if she doesn't see us." "Want me to explain this to your mother, honey?" Lavender clung to Ron's arm, gazing at him adoringly. Harry struggled to suppress his laughter, doubting Lavender's ability to placate Mrs. Weasley. "That's right, we should send someone back to the old house to inform Mrs. Weasley of our situation," Hermione said, her voice tinged with concern. She turned her gaze to Harry, who understood why he was chosen. With Lavender present, it was difficult for Hermione to direct Ron. With a subtle eye roll, Harry nodded. "I'll be back soon. Just wait here for me," Harry said, heading toward the fireplace. "Where are you going, Mr. Potter?" A sudden voice stopped Harry in his tracks. "Ah, Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley, Miss Brown, and Miss Lovegood." Atticus Blaine stood a dozen feet away from a group of young wizards, a deep smile playing on his lips under the curious gaze of onlookers. "What a wonderful coincidence that you're all here," he remarked. The scene unfolded with several young wizards from Hogwarts standing in a row, obediently in front of Mr. Atticus Blaine, their heads bowed in apprehension. Harry stared at his toes, lost in thought, recalling the last time he had gotten into trouble. "Let's go," Atticus said, his smile turning cold as he gestured for the young wizards to follow him. "We should talk somewhere else." End of this chapter. Chapter 1192. Application to join Speeview. The recent chaos had once again left Diagon Alley deserted, just as it was beginning to regain its vibrancy after the war. Atticus Blaine led a group of young wizards through the empty streets. The avenue, once bustling with life, now lay in desolation. Many shopkeepers had hastily closed their doors and fled when the marching crowds toppled walls and incited riots, fearing for their safety. Atticus guided the anxious young wizards to the leaky cauldron. The vast bar was devoid of customers. However, old Tom, the bartender, was unfazed by the current lack of business. The department had previously placed a large order for the parade, which had been quite profitable for him. Humming a cheerful tune, he polished glasses behind the bar. "Ah, Mr. Blaine!" Old Tom's eyes lit up as Atticus entered. With surprising agility for his age, he hurried over to Atticus. "May I have the honor of buying you a drink, Mr. Blaine, to celebrate your recent victory?" Atticus chuckled. "I was just planning to grab a bite, but sure, I'll have a glass of sherry, the original flavor." He turned to the students behind him. "And 5 glasses of orange juice, please." Old Tom eagerly set to work. "Take a seat," Atticus suggested, glancing around before choosing a spot by the window. He pushed 2 tables together, sat down, and gestured for Harry and the others to join him. "How's your summer homework coming along?" Atticus asked, folding his hands on his lap and casting a calm gaze over the young wizards, who sat upright. Most responded positively, except for Harry and Ron, who shrank back guiltily. They had completed their homework, but its quality had declined since Hermione returned home. A silence settled over the group. Atticus, observing the quiet students, found himself lost in thought. He acknowledged that he wasn't one to flaunt authority, whether in front of students or fellow wizards. Yet, as his reputation grew, people began to treat him with increasing deference. During his weeks assisting Amelia as an advisor, he encountered many wizards who were too nervous to speak in his presence. Atticus sighed softly. He realized he had become accustomed to maintaining a dignified demeanor. In this regard, Dumbledore had always been more adept at controlling himself. "I'm sorry, Professor." Hermione suddenly stood up, her face filled with regret. Harry followed suit, looking dejected. Luna, too, rose, her usually serene eyes showing a rare hint of anxiety. Ron and Lavender were slower to react, but eventually stood up nervously. Atticus raised an eyebrow but remained silent. "I shouldn't have let Harry pretend to be kidnapped by Luna," Hermione confessed, her lips pressed together in shame. "I shouldn't have used Polyjuice Potion to become John," Luna admitted. Atticus looked puzzled. He hadn't even asked any questions, yet the two girls confessed readily. Old Tom, carrying a tray, approached the table, placed it down, and discreetly withdrew. "Sit down," Atticus said, picking up his wineglass and tapping its crystal surface thoughtfully. "Youth grants you the right to make mistakes," he continued, his tone calm and understanding. "The wise learn from their errors and use them to grow." Harry lowered his head, absorbing the professor's words. Atticus Blaine lowered his head in shame. He was certainly not the wise man Professor Blaine had claimed him to be. Atticus didn't want to be too harsh on these kids. After all, their intentions were good. The impulsive nature they exhibited was a long-standing trait inherited from their Gryffindor ancestors. He couldn't expect them to be like him, calm and composed from the day he was born. Besides, if Harry and his friends truly learned to assess situations with caution, that might pose its own set of challenges. "Let's put an end to this matter here," Atticus said, bringing the wine glass to his lips. He took a sip, savoring the light, spicy flavor that danced on his taste buds. He exhaled slowly, trying to ease his weariness, and then turned his gaze, "Oh, Hermione. In fact, there's something I've wanted to discuss with you for quite some time, but the Ministry of Magic has kept me occupied." Hermione's heart, which had just settled, leapt into her throat once more. She fluttered her long, slightly damp eyelashes and stared at Professor Blaine nervously. Harry and the others immediately cast curious glances at her. "The organization you founded, Atticus paused, his memory a bit hazy. "Ah, yes, the House Elf Rights Protection Association. Do you have any plans to continue it?" Harry and Ron's mouths fell open in astonishment. Professor Blaine was specifically addressing Hermione about her seemingly absurd initiative. It seemed unbelievable. Even Hermione herself was caught off guard. She stood frozen for a moment before regaining her composure. "Oh, I fully intend to continue it, Professor," Hermione declared, ignoring Ron and Harry's bewildered expressions. She suddenly became animated and said excitedly, "Professor Blaine, I have a new plan to mobilize more students to join the movement to liberate house elf slaves." "Oh?" Atticus showed genuine interest. "Tell me about it." Hermione exhaled deeply, her eyes alight with determination. "I realize that teaching house elves to fight for their own rights is a long and arduous journey. I can't do it alone. I need to garner more support. But as far as I know..." Atticus glanced at Ron and Harry, who were struggling to suppress their laughter. "You've tried to gain more support before, haven't you? It doesn't seem to have worked." "That's because I used the wrong approach, Professor Blaine," Hermione admitted, glancing at Harry and Ron. "Helping house elves awaken to their rights is a thankless task. I shouldn't expect everyone to enjoy it, so I've decided to change my strategy." As she spoke, Hermione pulled out a bag containing 1,000 galleons from her pocket and placed it before them. "Oh," Ron exclaimed, looking from the purse to Hermione. "Are you mad, Hermione? You're going to deplete your savings for those little creatures?" "Exactly," Hermione replied, holding her head high. "I plan to pay a salary to everyone willing to join the House Elf Rights Promotion Association, Professor Blaine. If anyone makes a significant breakthrough, I'll also offer them a bonus." Your bonus will vanish in no time if you do that, Hermione, Harry cautioned honestly. He had no idea Hermione had withdrawn such a large sum from Gringotts for this purpose. Of course, I'll interview applicants, Harry, Hermione insisted. I'll ensure they don't join just to exploit the opportunity. Be realistic, Hermione, Ron interjected, shaking his head. The truth is, you can't always tell who's genuine and who's not. Hermione was immediately frustrated by the lack of support from her two best friends. She was about to retort when, in that case, if I want to join your organization, is that okay, Hermione? Atticus asked. Oh, of course. I'd love to have you. Hermione agreed happily without a second thought, only realizing afterward who had made the offer. Atticus Blaine had just submitted his application. You're planning to join the professor? Hermione exclaimed, her voice tinged with disbelief. It seemed like a joke, but the expressions on Harry and Ron's faces mirrored her shock, as if they had just seen a ghost. Yes, you heard me correctly, Atticus replied, nodding with a confident smile. So, Hermione, will you accept me into your organization, the Society for the Protection of the Rights of Intelligent Magical Creatures? End of this chapter. Chapter 1193, Changes for the Coming Year. Atticus Blaine was planning to join Hermione's organization? Harry and Ron exchanged bewildered glances. Surely, Professor Blaine wasn't after Hermione's gold, was he? After spending the summer at Grimmauld Place, they knew that the workshop Remus ran for him was incredibly profitable. In the entire wizarding world, aside from established business giants like the Malfoy family, few could rival Professor Blaine in terms of wealth. Hermione, too, was taken aback. Her organization had been inspired by an experience with Professor Blaine. At that time, she had eagerly invited him to join her in advocating for house elf rights. But now she blinked, realizing the broader implications. Society for the Protection of the Rights of Intelligent Magical Creatures? Hermione asked hesitantly. That's right, Atticus nodded, pleased with Hermione's quick understanding. It's not just about house elves. It's about all intelligent magical creatures. Don't you think many are treated unfairly in the wizarding world? Hermione bit her lower lip. Advocating for the rights of all intelligent magical creatures seemed daunting, perhaps beyond her capabilities. Actually, the situation is like this, Atticus continued, revealing more. There will be some changes at Hogwarts next school year. First, you'll have an additional course. Oh, don't worry. Like physical education, this new course won't be included in the Owls and Newts exams for now. It's just a trial. A new course? Harry momentarily set aside thoughts of Hermione's organization and asked with interest, Will you be teaching it, Professor Blaine? What will it cover? Oh, this particular course will be taught by professionals, Harry, Atticus replied with a smile. As for the specifics, I'll keep them under wraps for now, but I hope you take it seriously, as it could greatly enhance your personal abilities. Harry's excitement grew. Professor Blaine was not one to exaggerate. If he said the course was important, it surely was. Ron, standing beside Harry, also looked determined. Missing out on physical education had been a regret, but with Harry and Hermione's support, he had learned some valuable skills. This new opportunity was one he was determined to seize. Hermione naturally was resolved to excel in the course. Yet, she looked at Professor Blaine expectantly. He hadn't explained why he wanted to join her organization or why he had changed its name. In addition, Atticus continued, just like when Beauxbatons and Durmstrang visited Hogwarts, we'll welcome a study exchange group next school year. A study exchange group? Hermione exclaimed in surprise. Yes, from other magical schools, Atticus confirmed. A realization dawned on Hermione, and she covered her mouth in shock, disbelief etched on her face. Ah, you've guessed it again, Atticus chuckled. The exchange group will include various species, not just wizards. We've confirmed participation from goblins, centaurs, giants, werewolves, and vampires. Of course, house elves will be part of it too, though, to be honest, not many elves are willing to join. So far, I've only convinced Creature and Dom, but Dobby is very interested and has signed up. Harry stood there, mouth agape, unsure how to process this astonishing news. Was this a study exchange group or a gathering of diverse magical beings? Dark creatures invading Hogwarts? How did Professor Atticus Blaine manage to convince Professor Dumbledore and the other faculty members to agree? Even Hermione was rendered speechless by the idea. Goblins, giants, werewolves, vampires, centaurs. These intelligent creatures needed her help to fight for their rights? Of course, you should be aware that these creatures know nothing about wizard magic, just as we lack understanding of the magic inherited from their race, Professor Blaine explained. Due to racial differences, they aren't suitable to appear in any professor's class, so I thought of organizing an exchange and study group in the form of a club. We need a student with excellent grades who is willing to connect with them and take care of their needs at Hogwarts. Are you willing, Hermione? Hermione blinked in confusion. This seemed different from her house elf rights promotion organization. Why do you want to organize such a study exchange group, Professor Blaine? Harry asked, looking at Hermione sympathetically. After a moment's thought, he decided to speak up for his friend. From what I understand, most of them aren't friendly to wizards. You're right, Harry, Atticus continued with a smile. Throughout the long history of magic, wizards and intelligent magical creatures have often been at odds. This tension has persisted for thousands of years. If we don't actively seek change, this strained relationship will continue. After a pause, Atticus added, "We need to improve our understanding of each other. This is crucial for wizards, even more so than the war with Voldemort that we must win now." "How come?" Harry exclaimed in surprise. "Perhaps you haven't realized," Atticus said, gently stroking his wineglass, his tone soothing. "Today, the modern magical world has reached a point where there's almost no innovation in the magic we use daily. This is a consensus in the magical academic community. If this continues, the decline of magic is imminent, and we need to seek change." Atticus was pleased to see the young wizards listening intently. You all know that the racial magic mastered by these intelligent magical creatures is also quite remarkable. Hogwarts is the educational foundation of the British wizarding world. If students can draw insights from their interactions with these creatures, a new magic system might be born in the hands of one of you. A new magic system. Ron was in awe, even if he didn't fully grasp the concept. Harry glanced at Hermione, and judging by the gleam in her brown eyes, she was completely convinced by Professor Blaine. Of course, there are still objective challenges. Due to the history between both parties, initial contact may not be friendly. I need someone who is tolerant, patient, and idealistic to help establish the connection. Do you understand? Atticus looked at Hermione. Your tenacity and kindness in advocating for house elves' rights make you the best candidate, Hermione. Hermione's cheeks flushed, her breathing quickened, and a profound sense of mission filled her heart. Helping the stagnant magical academic world regain its vitality and promoting the development and evolution of magic to prevent its decline. What a noble mission. I do, Professor Blaine. Hermione's voice trembled with emotion. Oh, that would be wonderful. Atticus smiled warmly. As for the specific tasks, we'll discuss them in detail once school starts. There will be some daily responsibilities. For instance, when you teach them the basics of magic, they will be temporarily given wands. After the course, you'll need to collect their wands. And when they share their unique magic with the students of Hogwarts, you need to record it and give it to me for compilation. Make sure there are no conflicts with the students and ensure they aren't bullied, Atticus Blaine instructed, fiddling with something in his pocket. Hogwarts will be establishing scholarships next school year, Hermione. Your contributions in this area will be a significant factor in the evaluation. At that moment, Ron's eyes widened as he caught sight of the badge gleaming in the sunlight. A prefect badge, he exclaimed. That's right, Atticus confirmed, producing 2 prefect badges. He placed one in front of Hermione, whose face lit up with excitement. Then, to everyone's surprise, Atticus placed another prefect badge in front of Ron. The room fell silent as several young wizards, including Ron himself, stood frozen in disbelief. End of this chapter. Chapter 1194, Slytherin Elite. Is this for me? Ron's voice trembled as he finally managed to utter the words, feeling as though it took him an eternity. Atticus Blaine had already finished his drink and was halfway through his lunch. Yes, Atticus replied. In fact, I received these 2 badges a week ago. Professor Dumbledore sent me a letter containing them. Ron picked up the badge with trembling hands. The small piece of metal felt incredibly heavy, and it took him several attempts to secure it properly. There was no mistake. It was indeed the prefect badge. As he traced the cool surface with his fingers, his breathing grew heavier. Suddenly, he turned his gaze to Harry, realization dawning on him. "Congratulations, Ron," Harry said, his eyes fixed on the badge in Ron's hand. When Ron looked at him, Harry quickly masked his disappointment with a forced smile. Hermione receiving the prefect badge was expected, but Ron, what are you thinking, Harry? He chided himself. As Ron's best friend, he knew Ron was more capable than he appeared. He shouldn't be envious of Ron, just as he wasn't envious of Hermione for becoming a Triwizard Tournament champion. With this thought, Harry's smile became more genuine. "Oh, thank you," Ron replied, hesitating before smiling back. He then turned to Hermione, who quickly suppressed her surprise and congratulated him. "You're so handsome, Ron," Lavender exclaimed when it was her turn. Without a hint of shyness, she leaned in and kissed him on the cheek, ignoring his embarrassed struggle. Luna also congratulated Hermione and Ron, though her expression suggested she didn't take it too seriously. In the slightly tense atmosphere, Atticus calmly finished his lunch, wiped the corners of his mouth, and stood up. "See you at Hogwarts," he said, prompting everyone to rise and accompany him to the tent's entrance. "Oh, right," Atticus suddenly remembered, turning to Harry. "After your impressive performance at the Battle of Diagon Alley, Amelia believes the Ministry should increase its protection of you. I advised her not to be overly concerned, but given today's incident, she might bring it up again." "What does the Ministry plan to do?" Harry asked. "Perhaps send someone to protect you at Hogwarts," Atticus suggested before striding into the sunlight. For a wizard like Atticus, time was always in short supply. Delegating some Ministry of Magic responsibilities to Amelia had consumed most of the last week of August. However, delegating didn't mean relinquishing control. He continued to oversee the optimization and upgrading of various ministry departments, the reconstruction of Diagon Alley, industrial reforms in the wizarding world, law and order maintenance, and the fight against dark forces. Without his support, Amelia couldn't accomplish much. As night fell, Atticus, carrying a suitcase, stood beside the red telephone booth outside the Ministry of Magic. He watched an owl carrying a letter fly north until it vanished into the endless darkness. With a sigh, Atticus tightened his increasingly worn dark green wizard robe and reluctantly drew his wand, pointing it skyward. After more than an hour of grueling travel, Atticus stepped off the night bus, clutching a large bag of chocolates generously given to him by the conductor. He surveyed his surroundings, noting only a few dim lights in the village. Darkness stretched in every direction, making the small village feel like an isolated island in a vast ocean. Atticus found himself standing in an abandoned square in this desolate village, a reminder of the war's lingering impact. The monument, with the silhouette of a sword behind it, stood in a state of disrepair, its surface cracked and peeling. After a moment of silence, Atticus Blaine drew his wand and waved it. The circle of weeds surrounding the war memorial withered, and vibrant flowers blossomed from the fractured earth. The flowers swayed gently in the breeze, bringing warmth to the desolate night. "That's much better," Atticus murmured, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. His dark purple eyes scanned the surroundings with renewed focus. He soon locked onto his target and proceeded past an empty tavern and a row of shuttered houses, pausing to admire the two-story church at the village's center. A few crows took flight from the roof of a post office, its operational status uncertain. As Atticus set foot on the road, leading to the village's most esteemed villa, the faint strains of piano music that had filled the night air abruptly ceased. The sound of shelves collapsing and other noises carried on the wind. "Heh!" Atticus chuckled softly, undeterred. He stopped before a white wooden fence enclosing a garden, his gaze fixed intently on the dimly lit house that exuded a faint scent of blood. Placing his suitcase on the ground, Atticus tapped it with his wand. The dark golden lock sprang open, and an exquisitely designed box leapt from the suitcase into his waiting hand. After placing the chocolates inside, Atticus calmly closed the box. The garden gate stood ajar, and Atticus walked straight in, approaching the front door. Knock, 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 the sound echoed eerily. No one responded, as if the occupants had resolved to feign absence. A glint of amusement flickered in Atticus's eyes. The grating sound of the door hinges pierced the night's silence as it swung open. Cold, stale air wafted from the corridor leading to the living room, causing Atticus to squint. "Ho!" he exclaimed softly, stepping into the narrow passageway. The sight that greeted him in the living room drew another sigh. A grandfather clock lay shattered at his feet, its face cracked, and the pendulum discarded like an abandoned sword. The piano was overturned, its keys scattered, and nearby a chandelier lay in pieces, its glass shards reflecting the dim starlight. Cushions were strewn about, their feathers littering every corner of the room. "How dreadful," Atticus remarked with interest, stepping back to avoid the scarlet liquid dripping from the ceiling. "It seems I've arrived at an inopportune moment," he sighed regretfully, muttering softly before turning to leave, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet. "Wait!" Just as Atticus was about to step outside, a voice called out from the living room, tinged with exasperation. The corners of Atticus's mouth twitched, and he obediently halted, turning back with a smile. After a series of noises and the crunch of glass underfoot, a bald, rotund old man emerged from the living room, standing at the corridor's far end, panting as he glared at Atticus. "Oh, I suppose you must be Professor Slughorn?" Atticus beamed. "That's a relief. I feared you might have been harmed." "Oh, come on," the old man retorted angrily. "You knew I was here all along, didn't you? And how did you even know I lived here? I don't recall telling Dumbledore about my move." "Ah, indeed," Atticus replied with a smile, meeting Slughorn's wary gaze as he stepped back inside. "But you told. Your esteemed disciple at the ministry, Mr. Cresswell, informed me of your whereabouts," Atticus Blaine said, handing a jar of pineapple preserves to the rotund old man. "Mr. Cresswell kindly mentioned your fondness for preserved fruits of all kinds." Slughorn's light gray-green eyes flickered with a hint of desire as he glanced at the preserves, yet he remained motionless, a trace of hostility still evident. "Just like Dumbledore, you enjoy playing tricks on people, don't you? You knew I was here, but said nothing, causing me to waste a large bottle of dragon blood. You know how much that's worth in today's market." "Oh, but you didn't give me a chance to speak, did you, Professor Slughorn?" Atticus replied with a faint smile, his eyes twinkling as he regarded the old man. "Of course, I'm more than willing to compensate you for your losses. As for dragon blood, I happen to have a considerable supply." Slughorn's expression remained stern, his small eyes fixed on Atticus, who maintained his polite demeanor. Then, unexpectedly, Slughorn burst into a hearty laugh. "As expected from a Slytherin elite, you were far more charming than Dumbledore. Please come in." End of this chapter. Chapter 1195, Harmonious Conversation. "Thank you for your compliment, Professor Slughorn," Atticus Blaine chuckled, glancing around the dimly lit room. "I think there's no need for us to chat in the dark. If you allow me, I can help tidy up." "Ah, much more polite than Dumbledore," Slughorn grumbled, gesturing for Atticus to proceed. "Please go ahead." With a wave of his wand, Atticus set the room in order. The scattered furniture returned to its rightful place, decorations reassembled mid-air, feathers nestled back into cushions, and damaged books repaired themselves, aligning neatly on the shelves. The room was restored to its original state. Atticus caught a glass bottle that floated up from the floor, allowing the sticky red liquid on the ceiling to flow into it. Examining the dragon's blood in the rekindled light, he shook his head and casually placed the bottle on the wooden table beside the sofa. A bottle containing at least 20 ounces of dragon's blood and preserved fruit was pushed in front of Professor Slughorn, who had settled back into the sofa by the fireplace. "Oh, it looks quite impressive. I suppose the collector who obtained this dragon's blood did so before the poor fire dragon perished," Professor Slughorn exclaimed, blinking in admiration. "I suppose so," Atticus replied, though it had been so long he couldn't recall whether the dragon had survived. "But if it's just to compensate for the loss of my bottle of dragon's blood, it shouldn't cost so much. This bottle is worth at least hundreds of galleons." Despite his admiration, Slughorn's eyes betrayed a hint of suspicion. "It's extra. Consider it compensation for disturbing your rest with my late-night visit," Atticus said with a smile, which seemed to increase the retired Slytherin headmaster's admiration. "Then thank you for your compensation," Slughorn chuckled. "Would you like some whiskey?" Oh, that would be wonderful. I've traveled quite a distance, Atticus nodded, smiling. Slughorn, with some effort, rose and walked to the wine rack. He hesitated among several bottles of aged whiskey before saying, I suppose Dumbledore felt he had no chance, so he sent you here to try your luck, right? To be honest, young man, you're just asking for trouble. There's no need for that. Having made his choice, Slughorn returned slowly, holding the whiskey in one hand and 2 crystal glasses in the other. You know what I mean? Because you're from Slytherin, I'm willing to remind you that there's nothing here Dumbledore wants. He's completely mistaken. It's a waste of effort to try hard on me. Oh, I agree with some of your points, Atticus said, accepting the glass and smiling at the old dean, who was slumped on the sofa, catching his breath. We all agree that Dumbledore sometimes behaves like a wise old fogey. A smart old fogey. Wow, excellent review. Slughorn replied in a rather amused tone, but then asked, puzzled, Then I really don't understand. If you know you can't get anything from me, why bother to find out where I live and come all the way to see me? That is because, Atticus raised his glass gracefully, as the former headmaster of Slytherin House, a master in the world of potions, and a wizard renowned in the British wizarding world, there seems to be no harm in my visiting you, right? Ho! Slughorn eyed Atticus warily. Don't try to fool me, young man. But his suspicion quickly faded. Slughorn held his glass, studying the young man before him with a hint of surprise. When I left Hogwarts, Albus did try to persuade me to serve Slytherin for a while. But I didn't agree. I'm old, and it's time for me to enjoy a comfortable retirement. Atticus did not interrupt, maintaining his interest in the conversation and waiting patiently for the old dean to continue. The atmosphere between the two was unusually harmonious, given that they were complete strangers. Atticus Blaine had never met the old dean before, nor had they exchanged any correspondence. However, Atticus had heard numerous stories about the old dean from Dumbledore, and it seemed the dean had also taken an interest in him through various channels. Dumbledore had once mentioned that Professor Slughorn sent a veiled letter after Atticus helped Amelia become minister, advising caution and learning from past mistakes. Few people are as dedicated as he is, devoting their entire lives to Hogwarts without sacrificing their own, Slughorn remarked, scrutinizing Atticus. I must admit, you made me regret my decision back then. Atticus chuckled. What do you mean? Slughorn opened the box of preserved fruit Atticus had brought, savoring a piece with evident satisfaction. With a finger dusted in icing sugar, the old dean looked at Atticus with a hint of regret. If I had known a wizard like you would come to Slytherin, I wouldn't have let him go. But in the end, Severus gained a great advantage for nothing. Atticus's laughter was genuine. Just as Dumbledore had described, the old headmaster seemed to view him as a missed treasure. You're overpraising me. Many outstanding young wizards have emerged from Hogwarts in recent years. They're no worse than me. Perhaps I'm just better at attracting attention, Atticus replied modestly. Not at all overrated, Professor Slughorn countered, twirling his plump fingers in disapproval. If someone asked me to name a Slytherin wizard better than you, I'd have to mention the great Salazar Slytherin himself. The old dean looked at Atticus, who smiled silently with a somber expression. None of the students I've taught could compare to you. Of course, I'm referring to Severus. Your luck is truly enviable. Many of your students went on to become high-ranking officials in the Ministry of Magic or leaders in various industries, right? Atticus avoided mentioning Voldemort, not wanting to disrupt their harmonious conversation. Don't comfort me. I know I'll never surpass Severus, Slughorn said gloomily, popping another piece of preserved fruit into his mouth. Suddenly, he seemed intrigued. The Daily Prophet mentioned you were Muggle-born. Is that true, or is it for? Slughorn hesitated, searching for the right words. To gain more favor from the public? Atticus offered. Exactly, Slughorn nodded, looking determined. I suppose you're packaging yourself, right? It's easier for a Muggle-born wizard to achieve such success, so you claim your parents are Muggles, but in reality, you have a respectable family background. Let me guess, your father is Raphael Blaine? The editor-in-chief of Spell Innovation? Atticus laughed. I'm not that fortunate, Professor Slughorn. In truth, my parents are both Muggles. End of this chapter. Chapter 1196, Truly Professional Persuasion. Oh, stop calling me professor. I'm not a professor now, hiccup. The small flame in the fireplace dispelled the chill of the early autumn night, making the room as warm as spring. The rotund old man nestled into the cushions, pulling out his wand to conjure a melody from the piano keys, which began to play a graceful tune on their own. Though he had only indulged in a few glasses, Slughorn's cheeks were flushed, and he was slightly tipsy. I'll call you Atticus, and you call me Horace, okay? Oh, you're a very approachable wizard, Horace. What do you think of that? Atticus Blaine pointed his wand at Horace's glass, and it filled with a thick, clear liquor. They both downed their drinks in one gulp. For a moment, Horace's mind went blank, and he stared at the chandelier above his head before turning his gaze back to Atticus, who sat with an impeccable smile. Where were we, Atticus? I think we were discussing your brilliant teaching methods, Atticus replied, feigning hesitation. Oh, yes, that's it! Horace exclaimed, slapping his knee and reaching for another piece of candy from the half-empty box. What does Severus know about teaching? He's not cut out for it. Horace shook his head at Atticus. I know this might make you uncomfortable, given that he looked after you at Hogwarts, but if it were me, I would have done the same for a talent like you. Hiccup! In his drunken stupor, Horace waved his arms indignantly. Don't think I'm out of touch just because I'm retired. Look at what Slytherin has become over the years. Not a single decent talent has emerged since I left. Of course, you're an exception, Atticus. Horace grumbled. But you've achieved everything on your own. Severus's help was negligible, wasn't it? And as for Albus, Horace gave Atticus a knowing look. Though Albus praises you now, I bet he held you back when you were at Hogwarts. I heard about the incident when you set the forest on fire. He had the nerve to blame you when it was clearly his fault for not protecting the school. Atticus laughed heartily. You're absolutely right, Horace. Dumbledore is indeed biased against Slytherin, so we need a respected, fair, and open-minded authority to stand up for those Slytherin students facing prejudice and unfair treatment, don't you think? Oh. Horace averted his gaze, muttering, well, to be fair, it's not all Albus's fault. Slytherin did produce some unsavory characters. Hiccup, it's really terrible. How about changing the subject? Horace suggested, shuddering at a memory from long ago. He turned to Atticus with renewed interest. I heard that Diagon Alley, destroyed by the war, will be officially rebuilt before November. Ah, you are truly well informed, Horace, Atticus praised. Yes, the Ministry of Magic knows the entire wizarding world is eagerly anticipating this. They hope to restore Diagon Alley to the British wizarding community as soon as possible. Unfortunately, there's a lot of work to be done. The detailed planning and design drawings are still being handed over to Muggles for design. To address employment issues, the department plans to recruit construction workers from the lower classes who lack stable jobs and have meager incomes. However, this is a highly specialized job, and they will need pre-job training, including investing millions is no simple task, even for the goblins with their vast wealth. They require time to adjust their global financial strategies, including the early procurement of materials. Honestly, just thinking about these matters gives me a headache. Fortunately, I only need to offer advice and not do any of the actual work, Atticus Blaine quipped, causing Horace to chuckle. Atticus seized the moment to refill Horace's glass. Oh, sorry. Huh. Horace noticed and waved his hands. I'm afraid I can't drink any more. Just this one, Horace, Atticus coaxed in a friendly tone. For the great Slytherin? Great Slytherin. Oh yes, Slytherin is a good boy. Horace, convinced and with a flushed face, kept up the glass again and drank it all, while Atticus refrained from touching his own wine. Let's talk about Diagon Alley, Horace said, shaking his head in his drunken state. There's news that Diagon Alley will be very different after it's rebuilt. It should have been like this a long time ago. Diagon Alley has been the same since I was in school. Actually, to be precise, Diagon Alley will strive to maintain its original appearance. After all, it's a historical site, right? Seeing Horace's interest, Atticus decided to elaborate. The real changes will occur around Diagon Alley. The Ministry has plans to expand the area, transforming it into a city-like scale with distinct functional zones. Atticus painted a vivid picture of a magnificent city. The world's tallest Ministry of Magic building, a modern wizard hospital, a beautiful natural reserve for magical creatures, bustling commercial streets, developed industrial blocks, and orderly residential areas. This vision made Horace's drunken eyes light up with excitement. As for why the ministry has to allocate a portion of this limited land for manors and luxury villas, it's a necessary compromise, Atticus explained with a calm smile. Even with the goblin's wealth, it's not enough to build such a grand magical city. The ministry must seek its own development while also requiring contributions from the ancient families who control most of the wealth in the British wizarding world. Oh, you're going to use this to get them to pay, right? Horace quickly caught on. He imagined himself occupying the best location in this magical city, in a vast, wealthy area surrounded by mountains and rivers with pleasant scenery. A crystal-clear smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. Exactly. Who would refuse to own a villa passed down through generations in such a great city? It will surely fetch a sky-high price. Horace looked envious, his eyes full of longing. I'll never have the chance to live in a house like that in my lifetime. Oh, stingy Albus. If I want to buy a house like that, I'd have to be like Professor Binns, who started teaching 1,000 years ago. But Hogwarts doesn't pay ghosts. Yes, Atticus nodded with a smile. Who wouldn't want to spend their life in such an elegant environment, breathing fresh air, enjoying top-notch security, and having neighbors who are all respectable figures in the wizarding world? A single marble brick in the house is worth half a year's salary for a Hogwarts professor. Oof, Horace sighed, listening to Atticus's description. He glanced around sadly, suddenly feeling that his cozy Muggle house, which he had carefully chosen, was not comfortable at all. Of course, the land won't just be for the rich. There will also be a sanatorium that combines medical care and nursing, Atticus added, taking a sip of his drink. Atticus Blaine swirled his glass of wine, feigning a casual demeanor. A sanatorium that combines medical care and nursing services? He mused. Horace's eyes widened with a mix of desire and greed as he fixed his gaze on Atticus. Yes, precisely, Atticus replied, his voice slightly slurred from the wine. He leaned back into the plush sofa, a lazy smile playing on his lips. Dear Horace, such a wonderful place shouldn't be reserved solely for the wealthy. It's terribly unjust, don't you think? When I was designing it, I insisted that wizards who have made significant contributions to the British wizarding world, recipients of the Order of Merlin, First Class, and the like, should have the right to enjoy it. Take, for instance, the retired Minister of Magic. And surely, Dumbledore must be eligible as well, given his medal and lifelong dedication to Hogwarts. End of this chapter. Chapter 1197, The Crack in Nurmengard. Yes, that's for sure. Since it's a sanatorium established by the ministry, it can't just cater to the wealthy. We must consider those who have made significant contributions, Slughorn said, perking up with a smile. So how does it charge? Oh, that depends, Horace, Atticus Blaine replied, resting his elbows on the armrest of the sofa, his face supported by his hands. His eyes seemed less bright. People who own property in affluent areas are automatically eligible to live there and pay fees annually. But if they are individuals of merit, the ministry believes they should be cared for free of charge. Oh, it's free! Horace's small eyes sparkled, and his breathing quickened. That's wonderful. I've worked hard all my life, and it's just right for me to recuperate there. But it's not easy to get the Order of Merlin, First Class. If you say it's a contribution... Horace rubbed his hands, smiling. My dear Atticus, do you think I am qualified for this? Oh, Horace, you're considering that too? Atticus, feigning drowsiness, opened his eyes. He looked at Horace and hesitated for a moment. I can't say for sure, Horace. Of course, I know you hold a high position in the academic world of potions and have trained many outstanding young wizards, but please don't mind if I speak the truth. Where am I lacking? Horace asked urgently. Horace, the ministry can't invite every retired professor from Hogwarts or any top scholar in a particular magical discipline. What the ministry is planning is a world-class nursing home, not a refuge, Atticus said, embarrassed. Even in the current Hogwarts, I'm afraid only Dumbledore is qualified, and perhaps I should be included as well. Horace opened his mouth, then closed it again, repeating this several times before cautiously asking, So in your opinion, Atticus, is there any way for me? If you can improve the Wolfsbane potion and completely restore those unfortunate souls who are unwilling to become werewolves to their normal state, I think Amelia might grant you a manor, Atticus laughed, glancing at the clock in the corner. Oh my goodness, it's already 2 o'clock. Time flies by so fast. Atticus supported himself with the handrail and stood up, exhaling heavily several times before looking at Horace, who was caught off guard. Thank you for your hospitality, Horace. It has been a real pleasure chatting with you. Oh, you're leaving, Atticus? Horace was a little surprised and at a loss, pinching the corner of his blue-striped pajamas. Yes, it's late. I have to rush back to Hogwarts tonight. I have some work to arrange. Atticus picked up his suitcase and extended a hand to Horace. Although I would love to have a candlelight chat with you, Horace, I think this would be a severe test of the energy of a retired old man. So goodbye. My energy is not so bad, Atticus. Horace grabbed Atticus's hand and shook it, his eyes hesitant. Well, goodbye. Look forward to our next meeting, Horace. Atticus smiled slightly, turned, and walked out of the living room. Horace stood there, the light of struggle flickering in his light gray-green eyes. He watched Atticus, who had visited him late at night, stagger out of the living room, listening to the footsteps growing fainter until the sound of the door opening. Hey, wait! In an instant, his consciousness, dulled by alcohol for several hours, regained clarity. Horace nimbly jumped over the wine bottles and empty candied fruit boxes on the velvet carpet, rushed out of the living room into the narrow corridor, and called out to Atticus, who was about to step out. Under the cold moonlight, the young man's purple eyes were not drunk at all, and he smiled politely. Why, Horace? Is there anything else? I'm leaving. Now, Horace suddenly felt as if he were being mocked. He glared at Atticus Blaine with irritation. You're leaving. Oh, fine, no problem, but you're here to lobby for Dumbledore. That's true, Atticus nodded with a smile, bowing slightly to Horace in the cozy roar. But at the start of our conversation, you mentioned you knew nothing about the issue. Dumbledore was completely off track, wasn't he? Of course. Horace's breath caught, and his cheeks flushed slightly. But, are you planning to report back to Dumbledore? I never like to embarrass anyone, Horace, Atticus chuckled. I'll tell Dumbledore that I've thoroughly discussed Riddle's Horcrux with you and that you know nothing about it. Additionally, I'll do my best to persuade him not to trouble you again. Atticus glanced around the house, a respectable abode among the buildings in the small, remote village. I'm sorry to disturb your comfortable retirement. But seriously, Horace, he continued with a strong confidence in his calm voice, returning to Hogwarts to teach isn't a bad option. As long as I'm there, Riddle and his Death Eaters won't be able to breach Hogwarts and harass you. It's far better than hiding in this secluded place, living in fear, isn't it? Horace, shrouded in shadow, remained silent. By the way, since Hogwarts became independent from the board of directors, professors' salaries have increased significantly, Atticus added with a smile, turning to leave. Just raising wages isn't enough, Horace shouted, rushing out on the creaking floorboards after Atticus. There has to be a place for me in that nursing home. I know you have the final say on this matter. Atticus smiled softly and vanished under the deep starry sky. The owl carrying the letter flew north, bathed in the morning light and moonlight, soaring over mountains and rivers until it reached the eternal desolate land. It seemed as if the snow from last winter had just melted, the black earth emerging to breathe fresh air, and the gloomy sky began to sprinkle silver specks. The biting cold wind sounded like the mournful howls of countless undead, lingering around the cursed black tower all day long. The owl circled the tower several times before swooping into the window at the highest point, landing on the desk, exhausted. An old man with messy gray hair and a layer of white film around his eyes sat on the edge of the bed, reading a newspaper. He noticed the owl, but didn't look up, focusing intently on the article. Atticus Blaine blows the horn of change. The headline seemed particularly obscure and difficult to understand. It took the old man nearly half an hour to finish reading and turn to the second page. The picture on the second page showed a young man calmly facing many brightly dressed wizards in a square made of rammed earth, a great victory. Then the third page, Destruction or Rebirth. The accompanying photo depicted Atticus Blaine signing his name on an agreement. 4th edition, Ministry of Magic. The article read, "After centuries of inaction, the Ministry of Magic has finally realized it should do something real for the British wizarding community." This passage was quoted from a well-known current affairs reporter, Rita Skeeter, during an interview when asked about the Ministry of Magic's implementation of the minimum living security policy. It was reported that many well-known, prominent figures in the magical world have publicly expressed positive views on this policy. In the 5th edition of The Epic Wizarding Life of Atticus Blaine, recent examples of Atticus's achievements were highlighted once again. Accompanying the article was a striking photograph of Atticus, transformed into a radiant sun, soaring into the sky during the Battle of Diagon Alley. As I quickly flipped through the pages, I noticed that each one was filled with images of the young man, his features sharp and his eyes calm. The deep wrinkles on the old man's face, etched by years of hardship, seemed to deepen further. Losing interest, he neatly folded the newspaper, stood up with some difficulty, and shuffled over to the opposite wall. There, he placed the newspaper atop a towering stack of others. Meanwhile, the owl, having journeyed through mountains and rivers, finally regained some strength. It flapped its wings a few times and stood upright, its brown eyes reflecting the old man, who was staring blankly at the wall. Slowly, the old man turned to face the owl, then glanced at the letter tied to its foot. He remained silent for a long time, lost in thought. End of this chapter. For breath. The room, once filled with the echoes of the past, now seemed to close in around him, the walls pressing in with the weight of his memories. Atticus Blaine, the old man, stood there, his heart pounding in his chest like a distant drumbeat. The vision had been so vivid, so real, that it left him shaken to his core. He clutched the pocket watch tightly, its warmth a small comfort in the cold, oppressive atmosphere of the room. The pocket watch was a relic from a time long past, a reminder of a life that seemed almost forgotten. Its intricate design and vibrant colors stood out starkly against the drab surroundings, a beacon of hope in a world that had long since lost its luster. Atticus took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. The vision had shown him a world on the brink of destruction, a world where hope seemed lost. Yet, there was something in that vision, a defiance, a spark of resistance, that resonated deeply within him. He turned his gaze back to the window, where the golden beam of sunlight still pierced through the storm. It was a rare sight in this land of perpetual twilight, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, light could find a way through. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore echoed in his mind, a reminder of the power and fury of nature. Yet it was also a reminder of resilience, of the ability to endure and withstand even the most formidable of challenges. Atticus knew that he could not remain in this place of shadows and memories forever. The vision had stirred something within him, a call to action that he could not ignore. He had been given a glimpse of what was to come, and he knew that he had a role to play in the unfolding events. With renewed determination, Atticus placed the pocket watch back on the pillow and turned away from the window. The room, once a prison of his own making, now felt like a place of possibilities. He knew that he had to leave, to step out into the world and face whatever awaited him. As he made his way to the door, the wind howled outside, a reminder of the challenges that lay ahead. But Atticus Blaine was no longer afraid. He had seen the future, and he was ready to meet it head-on. With a final glance at the room that had been his sanctuary and his cage, he stepped out into the unknown, ready to embrace whatever fate had in store for him, to nurture and develop those talents. Professor Flitwick interjected with a cheerful tone, trying to lighten the mood. The great hall buzzed with excitement as the newly sorted students found their places at the long tables, their faces alight with anticipation for the year ahead. Meanwhile, in a distant, forgotten corner of the world, Atticus Blaine stood alone, his heart heavy with the weight of years gone by. The brief flicker of light that had illuminated his room moments ago had vanished, leaving him in darkness once more. The sight he had witnessed, a sky torn asunder by relentless lightning, the earth trembling beneath its fury, had filled him with a dread he could not shake. It was as if the end of the world had been laid bare before him. Despite his frail and withered frame, Atticus moved with surprising agility to the window, peering southward with a mix of awe and disbelief. Though his body remained weak, there was a subtle change in him, akin to a fresh sprout emerging from a desolate, withered branch. His once dull eyes now held a glimmer of vitality, a spark of life that had been absent for so long. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Atticus gazed out, his thoughts a tumultuous sea of memories and emotions. When he finally turned away, the room felt emptier than before. A silver plate lay by the door, its bread slices frozen solid in the chill air. The sound of his labored breathing filled the space, mirroring the turbulent sky outside. "This is my life," he murmured, his voice a whisper of resignation. The first half of his life had faded like a distant dream, leaving only the stark reality of this austere room. Occasionally, a fleeting ray of light would pierce the gloom, but it never lingered. With deliberate steps, Atticus moved toward the door, his mind a prison he was finally ready to leave behind. He stepped over the cold, dry bread, the sound of bubbles bursting in the void echoing in his ears. In that moment, he felt a release, a liberation from the confines of his past. He took only his pocket watch, a relic of time, as he descended the tower. Each step down was a journey through his memories, a reflection on a life lived within the castle's cobwebbed walls. The once grand entrance hall, with its faded oil-painted ceiling, bore witness to his farewell. The sky outside, seen from the castle's threshold, seemed brighter, less oppressive than the view from the high tower. The ground was blanketed in snow, the wind biting and fierce, yet Atticus felt no cold as he made his way to the courtyard gate. A sudden crack echoed behind him, and he paused, glancing back at the castle. The words, "for the greater good," once boldly inscribed on the gate, had weathered away, leaving only deep cracks in the stone. The irony of the phrase was not lost on him, and he chuckled softly to himself. With renewed determination, Atticus continued forward, his figure soon swallowed by the barren wilderness. Nurmengard, after half a century, was finally devoid of its prisoners. Back at Hogwarts, the great hall shimmered with the glow of thousands of candles, a stark contrast to the desolation Atticus had left behind. The sorting ceremony had concluded, and the air was filled with the promise of new beginnings. As the professors exchanged words, the spirit of hope and potential filled the room, a reminder of the magic that lay within each child, waiting to be discovered and nurtured. Professor McGonagall interjected, "To help them discover their talents, think about Mr. Longbottom. He's quite impressive now, isn't he?" Severus's lips twitched slightly as he glanced at Dumbledore and Atticus Blaine, who were both smiling at him. "Perhaps you haven't noticed, but there's a whole room of people waiting to eat. If you two have something to say, please do it quickly," Severus remarked dryly. "Oh, my apologies," Dumbledore replied with a smile, his blue eyes twinkling as they settled on Atticus, who was seated beside Severus. "Atticus, would you mind informing the students about the changes this year?" The professors, accustomed to such requests, looked at Atticus with anticipation. "At your service, Headmaster Dumbledore," Atticus replied with a courteous bow. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, he rose slowly to his feet. The bustling auditorium fell silent, and all the eager faces turned towards him. "Welcome to our new students, and welcome to Hogwarts. Congratulations on embarking on what may be the most wonderful 7 years of your life. And to our returning students, welcome back," Atticus said with a warm smile. "Before we begin the feast, I'd like to share a few changes happening at Hogwarts this year. Just a few words." End of this chapter. Chapter 1199, A Small Dispute. "First, allow me to introduce Professor Horace Slughorn," announced Professor Atticus Blaine, directing the young wizard's attention to a rotund, bald old man with a genial smile, seated beside Snape at the faculty table. "This is the unfortunate fellow we've acquired this year. At his age, it seems he can't endure much hardship, wouldn't you agree?" Like many others, George Weasley observed the old wizard with interest as he rose from his seat and bowed to the assembly. Harry sensed Fred was hinting at something, but he chose not to react. Professor Slughorn will be teaching potions to 5th through 7th graders this year. He is a seasoned educator and was once the head of Slytherin House. I trust he will get along splendidly with all of you. Before Professor Blaine could finish, the auditorium buzzed with chatter. Almost everyone turned their eyes incredulously towards Snape at the staff table. "That old man is teaching us potions?" George exclaimed, looking at Snape with surprise and confusion. "What about Snape? We can't be so optimistic as to think he's been fired, can we? He has such a good rapport with Professor Blaine." Hermione shot George a warning look, signaling him to be quiet. "Oh, so this is where you start controlling people, right?" George remarked with a nonchalant smile upon seeing Hermione's gesture. As for Professor Snape, Professor Blaine's voice resonated once more from the front of the auditorium. "He will be teaching potions to 1st through 4th graders." Professor Blaine's explanation left many puzzled. "I thought he was here to teach defense against the dark arts," someone murmured. Cheers erupted from the Gryffindor table, particularly from students in grades 5 to 7. Fred turned to share this celebratory news with Harry and the others, but their calm expressions left him bewildered. "What's wrong with you? Cheer up, Harry. Snape can't torment you anymore, can he?" "Oh, we've already celebrated," Harry chuckled. "He invited me to an impromptu dinner in his compartment on the train this afternoon." "An impromptu banquet?" More students leaned in, their curiosity piqued, a situation Harry never relished. "It was actually quite dull," Neville interjected. "We spent the entire afternoon listening to him brag about his connections with famous wizards, as if he had summoned us just to flaunt." "Shh!" Hermione hissed, glaring at them more fiercely, but Fred and George met her with amused defiance. Professor Slughorn received a smattering of applause. His affable demeanor was a welcome contrast to Snape's perpetually dour expression, as if the world owed him a fortune. As for defense against the dark arts, Atticus Blaine continued with a smile. "The school extended an invitation to a renowned individual, but we have yet to receive a response. Consequently, defense against the dark arts classes for 1st and 2nd years will be suspended. For grades 3, 6, and 7, the class will temporarily be replaced with physical education." Harry was taken aback. This was news to him. "Then what do we do?" Hermione fumed, glaring at the staff table. "We don't have defense against the dark arts, or PE. "Oh, you still feel hard done by." Fred's grin drew Hermione's ire. "Last year, Hogwarts hosted the Triwizard Tournament, and we enjoyed a splendid year with the elites from Beauxbatons and Durmstrang. This year, Hogwarts will also welcome a group of distinguished guests who will arrive this weekend to share a delightful time with us on campus," Professor Blaine announced with a smile. "Out of courtesy and grace, I hope you will join me outside the castle gates to greet them at 5 p.m. this weekend." "Who are they?" someone immediately inquired. "Oh, life sometimes needs a little anticipation, doesn't it?" Professor Blaine replied enigmatically. Atticus Blaine chuckled softly. "You'll understand in due time. For now, I hope they receive your respect and care during their stay at Hogwarts. If any conflicts arise, I would be deeply regretful." A crowd began to murmur, speculating about the identities of the mysterious visitors. "This is quite an odd statement," Neville mused, stroking his chin thoughtfully. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, then turned to Hermione, who wore a tense, anxious expression. The identities of these enigmatic guests and Professor Blaine's hint about the renowned individual invited to teach defense against the dark arts were the main topics of conversation throughout the opening feast. Harry and his friends knew the answer to one of these mysteries, but none dared to speak of it, fearing it might incite widespread panic. As for the other, they were completely in the dark. After a summer apart, the young wizards had endless stories to share, especially given the significant events that had transpired. The conversation soon shifted to the war that had left Diagon Alley in ruins, and the captured gang members became a focal point of interest. "Look at those Slytherins. They got what they deserved," Ron exclaimed indignantly. However, his expression shifted to satisfaction as he glanced at the Slytherin table, where Malfoy and his companions sat. Harry and Hermione followed his gaze. Theodore Nott and the Greengrass sisters, with their somber expressions, seemed out of place amidst the Great Hall's festive atmosphere. Harry understood their discontent, but the sullen faces of Parkinson, Zabini, and others puzzled him. Their family businesses might have been severely impacted by the Plaza Accord, Hermione speculated with a touch of sympathy. They must be going through a tough time. "I still stand by what I said," Ron grumbled, feeling vindicated. If there were a Death Eater in my family, I wouldn't be able to attend Hogwarts. And what about Sirius, Ron? Hermione challenged, glancing at him. Don't forget, his brother Regulus also served you-know-who. That's different, Hermione, Harry interjected. Regulus eventually turned against him, didn't he? Hermione sighed deeply. Even so, Harry, Daphne, Astoria, and Theodore haven't done anything wrong. They didn't aid you-know-who. They're just unfortunate to have such parents. I can't believe you're defending them, Hermione, Ron said, staring at her with furrowed brows. Hermione retorted, her voice tinged with frustration. Well, Ron, can you honestly say none of your relatives have ever broken the law? But that doesn't reflect on you, does it? The law has never. Oh, dear Miss Granger, George interjected with a smirk. I can assure you, the last Weasley to be imprisoned for breaking the law was probably over a century ago. He raised an eyebrow at Hermione, challenging her. Harry was about to intervene to prevent the argument from escalating, but the clattering of the hall saved him. The opening feast had concluded, and students from all houses were leaving their seats, Harmondsmen, eager to return to their common rooms and begin the traditional activities. Oh, Hermione exclaimed, suddenly remembering. Hurry, Ron, we're prefects, and we need to guide the first-year students. Ron, who had been glaring at Hermione, snapped to attention. He quickly stood up, his face flushed, and fumbled with the shiny prefect badge in his pocket. As expected, Fred and George made a few teasing remarks, which only made Ron more flustered, his fingers clumsily struggling to pin the badge to his chest. Let me help you, dear, Lavender said, leaving Patil with a triumphant smile. She approached Ron and deftly pinned the badge for him, alleviating his embarrassment. Hermione, growing impatient, urged him on. Come on, Ron, the new students are already feeling overwhelmed. We have to hurry. Hey, Granger. At that moment, a seventh-year girl briskly approached the front of the Hufflepuff table. Catching Hermione's puzzled gaze, she gestured toward an empty seat at the staff table. Professor Blaine asked me to tell you that he wants you to go to his office. End of this chapter. Chapter 1200, Cherish Life and Stay Away from Crime. Hermione was taken aback when she knocked on Professor Atticus Blaine's office door on the third floor of the main city hall, only to find that he already had visitors. These visitors were none other than the culprits who had sparked the recent conflict between her and Ron. Professor Blaine sat at his desk, fingers interlaced against his abdomen, calmly observing Malfoy, Parkinson, Nott, and the Greengrass sisters, primarily Slytherin students enrolled in his physical education class. Ah, you're quite prompt, Miss Granger, Professor Blaine remarked, extending a hand towards her. Please, wait a moment. Hermione nodded hesitantly, her cheeks flushed and her breathing still heavy. She walked towards the sofa, her lips pursed. As she passed the display cabinet, she couldn't resist a curious glance. The cabinet in Professor Blaine's office was renowned among students for its intriguing exhibits. It was no surprise that, with the start of a new school year, students would attempt to smuggle dangerous items into the school. Among the peculiar exhibits, the most striking was the grapevine cane from Vitia Cleona. Hermione regarded the cane with a hint of awe before sitting upright on the sofa. Malfoy and the others cast cold glances at Hermione before losing interest. The atmosphere in the room was tense, and even the cool autumn breeze wafting through the windows and the distant sound of waves in the forest couldn't dispel the oppressive feeling in the office. On the desk lay several documents, some concerning school affairs, and others routine reports from the Ministry of Magic. Atticus Blaine glanced through them casually. Finding nothing of particular importance, he neatly stacked the documents and set them aside with a decisive snap. The sound startled the students across from him, causing their shoulders to twitch involuntarily. Tell me what you think, Atticus said calmly, his gaze steady. What do you mean? Draco finally asked after a moment of hesitation. It seemed the conversation was just beginning, Hermione thought, holding her breath and focusing intently. In theory, it's not my role to provide you with psychological counseling. Perhaps Severus would be more suited for that. However, since your dissatisfaction involves me, I cannot ignore your feelings. If left unchecked, that dissatisfaction could fester into hatred, harming both yourselves and innocent people. Atticus explained, looking meaningfully at Draco, whose face paled instantly. Silence followed, which didn't surprise Hermione. If she were in their position, she too would be at a loss for words. "It seems you're unwilling to open your hearts to me," Atticus said, shaking his head in disappointment. "Then let me speak for Knott and the two Miss Greengrasses." Theodore Knott and the Greengrass sisters, Daphne and Astoria, straightened instinctively at the mention of their names. Atticus's gaze darkened as he regarded the three students, two of whom were fifth years facing their OWLS exams, and one a mere third year. "Do you hate me?" Atticus's question was direct and piercing, causing Hermione's heart to skip a beat. She glanced at Professor Blaine, trying to gauge his intentions. She had an inkling of what he wanted to discuss with them, but she hadn't expected him to be so forthright. The three students were visibly taken aback, struggling to maintain neutral expressions. Yet, the question demanded an answer. As the only boy among them, Theodore felt compelled to respond. "No," he began, his voice steady, yet uncertain. "Professor Blaine." Theodore Knott's expression was sullen. "Ho," Atticus Blaine looked at Knott. "You and I both know that your answer is a lie, Theodore." Theodore remained silent. "Your father was a Death Eater, and he was found on the battlefield during the Battle of Diagon Alley," Professor Blaine continued calmly. His words made Hermione jump with fear. She noticed Theodore clench his fists, veins bulging on his forehead, his face a mask of anger. "Perhaps what I say may surprise you, but the fact is that I do not look down upon Death Eaters. However, I do believe they must pay a price for their sins," Atticus said, intertwining his fingers and looking at Theodore with a calm demeanor. "I think any rational and clear-minded wizard would not refute this point. Of course." The pain in Theodore's eyes softened Atticus's heart. "I will not treat his children differently just because their elders are dark wizards. Not only me, but also any professor at Hogwarts will not do so. This is the basic quality of being a teacher." Hermione mentally applauded this statement. Several Slytherin students seemed to have turned into silent statues, unable to speak, staring at the ground in silence. However, Professor Blaine's words seemed to ease Theodore's tension. Though pain still brewed in his eyes, his clenched fists loosened slightly. "Professor." Theodore's hoarse voice drew the attention of the students in the office. "I heard my father was imprisoned in Avalon Prison." Theodore gritted his teeth, his breathing rapid. There. "It's different from Azkaban. There are no Dementors torturing the prisoners," Atticus explained. "But I heard there are eight-eyed spiders there," Theodore said, looking at Professor Blaine with fear flickering in his eyes. "The eight-eyed spiders are there only to maintain order, to prevent prisoners from escaping or being rescued. They are not responsible for torturing the prisoners," Atticus clarified. "In fact, there is a fundamental difference between Avalon Prison and Azkaban. They do not use intimidation or torture to punish prisoners. Instead, they hope that the prisoners can truly repent of their crimes." "Real remorse?" Theodore asked, bewildered. "That's right," Atticus nodded. "The prisoners are educated in the right ideas there, and they are also taught to work." "Labor?" Hermione blurted out. "That's right, Miss Granger," Atticus replied, nodding. "Just like the villagers who marched to Diagon Alley a few days ago, the prisoners need to work in Avalon, farming, raising pigs, and so on." The thought of the head of the Knott family farming and raising pigs after being imprisoned almost made Hermione laugh out loud. She pinched her thigh hard to maintain the serious atmosphere of Professor Blaine's conversation. What amused Hermione was not necessarily amusing to Draco and others. They felt deeply ashamed at the thought that their fathers might one day farm and raise pigs in Avalon. However, upon reflection, this was indeed far better than Azkaban. Yet Theodore still looked pale. The knowledge that his father no longer had to endure the torment of Dementors eased much of his resentment. However, the idea of his father, accustomed to a life of luxury, spending his days under the supervision of a prison guard and performing menial labor, was perhaps more painful than death for him. "My father," Theodore said, his face alternating between blue and red as he gritted his teeth. "I heard he was sentenced to life imprisonment. I still have a chance. If he behaves well in prison, I think he has a chance to see the light of day again," Atticus reassured him. Atticus Blaine tapped the table, and a document flew out from a drawer in the bookshelf. Instead of landing in front of him, it soared towards Theodore. Startled, Theodore caught the document and glanced at the cover. His eyes immediately sharpened with interest. "The Avalon Prison Management Regulations," Atticus explained, "contain some of the behavioral guidelines I've drafted for inmates. By adhering to these, prisoners can either reduce or extend their sentences based on their conduct." Draco and the others cast intrigued glances at the document in Theodore's hands. Who knew? It might prove useful to them someday. "Professor Blaine, may I send a copy of this to my father?" Theodore asked, eyeing the thick stack of papers. It was too cumbersome for a thorough read at the moment, so Draco took it from him. Theodore looked at Professor Blaine with a mix of hope and anxiety. "There's no need," Atticus replied, shaking his head. "Every prisoner is taught these regulations upon entering the prison. They are well aware of them, but whether they choose to follow them is another matter. If you wish for your father's early release, Theodore, you should encourage him to embrace reform when you see him." "I still have a chance," Theodore murmured in surprise, his eyes widening. The other young wizards, including Hermione, turned to Professor Blaine with astonishment. "Certainly," Atticus nodded calmly. "To educate students about the importance of obeying the law, valuing life, and steering clear of crime, Hogwarts will organize a special educational activity this semester. All young wizards in the 5th grade and above can apply to visit the newly established Avalon prison." End of this chapter.